for it. Boyo alert. How we doing, people? This is going to be a fancy one. We put our fancy pants on, and we've going to make it beautiful. So we hope you're all doing well. I'm here with James P. Dowling right now, who's on his soy phone. I don't know. He might be looking up drop shipping some soy straight to his home, like huge big barrels of it, so he can just consume it all at once, and then become like, I don't know, just become a degenerate. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm well. I'm feeling very comfortable. I'm not wearing any trousers today because once again,
yes, getting that trouser game on, James.
although I move the mirror from behind myself so you can't see myself flexing my bunghole in the background. So don't worry about that, people. We're keeping it PG-13, family-friendly Christian broadcast.
Well, speaking of that, I want to show the people.
Oh no, not this! No, I've had a sneak peek at this for fuck's sake.
Let's get straight into it, man. I wanna show you this little story I saw. I was reading through the news and I saw someone. I think this might have been the Telegraph or something, and they were running an article on this, and they claimed that this was London in 2119. Did you recognize this place at all? Does it look familiar?
It does look familiar. Is that Big Ben in the background?
Yeah. And I think something's happened. I see you've taken up the old agriculture anyway, which is good. It's good to see. You know, so wholesome act anyway. And it's clear that you've been taken over by a certain amount of people. It seems like our plot has developed from last week.
There's very, very deep swamp water because their hands and their legs must be completely and utterly submerged. And is he whipping using his bicep? Is he just holding it in the muscle itself?
Yeah, man, he's a beast. He's got that sick whip. And this apparently, now this is a very interesting story. This is apparently the house of someone very, very important, someone very, very someone very, very special to us, but also apparently a dissident. And he was apparently this particular day when this was happening, he was just watching TV.
Why am I just their head? I'm not even looking at the TV. I'm looking at the back of the TV.
The thing I love the most about this is how good the pictures are, considering these are just like terrible cutouts. I was like, yes. But why he was watching on TV is really important. All right, so he was watching the news. And they were running through. You see, it was National Pride Day. They were talking about the time they took over. It was the celebration of the Great Revolution when they established the communist caliphate. And these are all the kangaroos. For anybody at the podcast, this is just ridiculous at this point. So they were having a chat, but they were having a chat about how they were after conquering, but then they decided to go over to the weather-roo and see what was doing. This is where they discuss their further the expansion of the caliphate, the communist caliphate, the kangaroo communist caliphate. and so they were talking about how they've got this border, and then they're going to hopefully move it up there and really show people what's going on.
So as a weather forecast, it's not going to be windy. It's so cloudy with a chance of kangaroo caliphate today, lads.
Guaranteed. But the most interesting then is, and this is for our main star here, James, sitting in his little house watching TV, watching this news, is that they said because they're beginning this advance that they have to tighten up the grip a little bit. Oh, damn. So they're looking for someone. Just freaked James out. James went running down a little alley. He was all scared. He didn't know what to do. He was like, how did this happen to my society? Surely there was someone. Surely there's some reason that this happened.
I look so happy. I'm just amused by the whole situation.
And little did he know that behind all this, even though there was kangaroos everywhere, behind all this, there was actually someone who was pulling the strings, someone who was controlling all this and making massive profit. And that was the Irish question with their pot of gold.
Fuck you.
People, how are you doing today?
Hang on. What's the end of that story? Precisely.
No, we're gonna leave it to the cliffhanger until next time.
Right. Okay. We should release this in an ebook form. $99. You can buy it on gumroad.com.
I think so. People, today we're here to talk about the big story in Aeon again, and Jung's conclusions on Jung's conclusions on the question of religion and Catholicism and all that, and what we should do about that. So we're going to run through it. We're going to take a different approach. It's going to be very visual. We're going to have many slides, and me and Jimmy are going to be bouncing back and forth between it. So by all means, if you have questions, drop them in the chat, or if you want to get them skipped to the top, skip the queue, you can drop them on PayPal. Go for Boyo Alert, and we will check them out at the end. But for now, we're just going to run through with it because it's a big story, and it's a beautiful story. And we look forward to doing it. So I'm going to start with part one. Hope you're all doing well. The main question that I've noticed from studying all this stuff is the problem of suffering keeps coming up. Or maybe the main question of why people get attracted to things like religion is the challenge of the problem of suffering. So as Nietzsche says, to live is to suffer, to survive is to find meaning in the suffering. And this idea sits central to everything we do in regards to be honest, nearly everything we do. It seems to revolve around this. It's absolutely crazy. All our behavior is like, how do we get out of a state of pain or lack towards a state of fulfillment and pleasure? And in the most basic sense, that can be like, I'm in a state of hunger and now I want to move towards a state of being full. But then on a most profound sense, that can be in a place where it's like, I don't like where my life is at and I want to do something more meaningful. And this becomes a massive problem because having when you really get into suffering and pain and all these type of things, you discover that there's a lot more to it than initially meets the eye. People think that pain is some type of almost physical thing of some sort, but it's absolutely astounding how much pain is influenced by meaning, by your understanding of why you suffer. And as Nietzsche says as well, quote Nietzsche like a machine here, he says that a man who is a why can get through any how. And that's because whatever you're trying to overcome, whatever situation you're in, if you have a reason to justify why it hurts, if you're saying, okay, you're on the treadmill at the gym or you're lifting them weights at the gym and you're feeling that burn and you're saying, this is because I want to improve and I'll be more beautiful and people will like me more. That can motivate you through those hard times. If you can keep that conscious in your head and explain to yourself, this is why I'm doing it, you'll be able to push through it. And so when people, and especially Nietzsche, this is something I don't think people understand, is when Nietzsche says someone like a great man or a strong man, he doesn't in many senses actually mean someone who has the spiritual strength to hold these visions prominent in their minds so that they can pull themselves out of these states of pain, so that they can keep fighting through them, and so that they can keep that meaning conscious when they're going through the suffering. And that's very hard. It's easy for us to pontificate it, but like when you're in a boxing match and you're after getting 20 punches, odd punches to your stomach, and you're starting to get that sickly feeling that you get when that happens. It's very hard for you to keep visualizing, like as Conor McGregor says, keep visualizing you holding up that championship medal at the end. But if you can pull that off, you can change how that feels in a strange way. It's absolutely profound how it works. And we have there's a mistake going on in modern society where we think the pain is this sort of physical thing and we treat it this way. We drop, like we have this idea that it's almost like chemical. So what you got to do is you got to drop in some pills, some chemistry, and that will change your brain. But this guy here, Lorimer Moseley, I recommend you check him out. He's from Australia. He explains all this in amazing detail and profound. He's the guy who studies people who have lost their arms, but then they still feel their arms and all that, because that's just such a strange phenomenon. And he's come to the conclusion, and he presents it very well, that there's so much more going on to pain than we think. It seems to be a collaboration of several different inputs. You get that actual physical input, but then you also get how you're feeling at that time, your emotions, and what people are telling you. And then, of course, the famous placebo effect. So if someone says, if you believe that something's going to make you better, if you believe something's going to make you better, then when you take it, it will help you because your brain will think that it is. Your emotional, your medical, like what you think is going on will affect it. So there is something very profound about this stuff. And again, it moves back into this idea of, why does things hurt? Why are we in situations of pain? Why? How? And this is the model that we sort of get. How dangerous is the situation really? Why does this thing hurt? what is happening? Is it like, am I about to lose my hand? Am I about to, was I bitten by a snake? Am I in danger? And when all these things are pressing on you, everything amplifies up and gets worse. What you interpret as the meaning of the situation becomes your reality, becomes how much it hurts. And so if you can conjure up this belief that you are not as vulnerable as your brain is perceiving right now, you are able to overcome, or you're able to feel less pain. And so the soul of a warrior in Nietzsche's understanding begins in the spirit, in that sense. And he even said that the original nobles that he was always talking about, in, like, he'd look at the ancient Greeks and all that, you'd imagine that those Ubermensch of the past were these big muscular bodybuilder types. But he said, of course they were strong, but what they were mainly is strong in spirit. These are people able to overcome. These are people able to beat all situations, all pain, all setbacks. And they would do that by gathering meaning and justifying why it hurts. And so, this type of person, like, and I've even seen it in myself. At one point, I got a pretty chronic injury, which led me to go into all this stuff. And chronic pain down here is unlike acute pain. Chronic pain can be debilitating. It serves no helpful purpose. It may be caused by a malfunction of the central nervous system, such as damaged nerves that send signals of a threat without any real stimuli. So that's such a weird experience when you're feeling pain, but there is no damage. But that happens all the time. And I had a situation where you can convince yourself that's real. You can kind of teach your nerves that you are in pain. And so I hurt myself and I started getting into that. In order for me to get out of it, I had to teach myself that I am not a lump of sugar, I was scared because I had this problem with sciatica going down my leg, and I was scared of bending over because I went into a doctor and he said to me, okay, you're after busting one of your spinal nerves. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, you're after damaging, like it's after bursting out. And if you move, more of it's going to pop out. You're going to lose your disc and it's going to ruin you forever. And I was freaked out. I was like, oh, I've broken my back. What? This is so crazy. And later on, I discovered it wasn't that at all. But that little story you put in my head made me frightened to my core of bending my back, because I thought I'd bend it worse. And so every time I get this little tinge of pain that turned out to be coming from a muscle down in my leg, every time I get this little tinge of pain, I would freak out. It's like, oh my God, my back is bursting more, and it would hurt more, and it would hurt more and hurt more. And then after a while, I met another physio. He was more of a trainer, and he was like, dude, no, you're fine. Just lift some weights. And that's the exact opposite of what the other dude was telling me. And so I started doing that, and I got better. And over time, like a very long time, I slowly conditioned my brain to understand that, bending over does not equal. Do you know what happened one day is I was bending over to pick up some weight, and I thought my back was straight, and I didn't feel any pain. And I looked in the mirror, and I saw that my back was bent. And then I just sort of snapped out of it. I was like, wait a second.
Are you sure that that's why you were bending over, to pick up some weight?
James, please. I'm trying to be serious, you motherfucker. And anyway, so I was bending over to pick up some weight, and then that happened. So it was super interesting. Again, this all swells around this idea that pain is related to meaning. And this is a huge topic I would like to dig into a lot more, but I'm not going to do it here. We will come into it later. Instead, what we're going to do is talk about how this maps onto cultures, because in our current mindset, we do not think that pain is in any way related to meaning. This is what Lumiere is trying to push. He's trying to say, all right, this is a lot bigger of a deal than we think. But this is something we lack. We think that the way we deal with pain is through physical solutions, through chemistry, these type of things. But this is not working at all. You see, obviously, there is these typical diseases. These are going up, but look at chronic pain. And as we said before, this is something that is often illusionary. It's unbelievable. We're using the American statistics here, but 100 million, that's like nearly 30% of the population, I believe. That's unbelievable. So like 1/3 of Yanks are walking around in chronic pain, and that's only something going on in their heads. And so that's an astounding thing. And I wonder, was it like that in the past? I don't know, because every indication is showing that this is something that's getting worse. This is something, like, we talk about the depression crisis and all that, and who knows, that could be related to this as well. Like, is depression a sort of extension of nihilism to some extent? Or maybe when you do have a chemical imbalance in your brain, the vacuum of meaning that is the modern world makes it unbearable, considering that many of your ancestors probably had the same thing, but they fucking made it true as well. So that's something interesting about this. And of course, it's getting unbelievably worse, as we're saying. The opioid crisis you've probably heard of before is skyrocketing right now. And now, what is an opioid? An opioid is the most basic drug for numbing your ability to feel pain. That's what it does. Heroin is, people describe it as going into bliss for a while, because you don't feel anything anymore. You don't feel any pain. You just feel good. You just get endorphins and all that. After you exercise, you get a kick of opioids, endorphins, I believe. I'm not quite sure what they are, but it is that type of thing. It's a morphine derivative that you get after exercise, and you don't feel pain anymore. And this is what people are going through now. They're taking more of these because they're in pain. They don't feel good. And I'm suggesting that it's because there's a vacuum of meaning in the sky. We've lost why we live. And everybody knows this. You've heard this story before. You've got that whole problem of meaning, of the crisis of meaning, of nihilism and all that. And the ancients knew this as well. And this is something that is very important to understand, is, as Nietzsche was saying, it's the men of the spirit that become the ones who take over the world, the men who believe in themselves, the men who believe there's a reason why they're fighting, those who find meaning in the suffering, as they say. And how does one get meaning? And it's always a story. When I was bending over and picking up weight, I was always I was always really worried, because there's a story in my head. The story was that my back was broken, and if I bent over, I was too vulnerable. I would damage my back. You suffer because you're weak. Your back is too weak. And so that story would play in my head and make things worse. I would move less, and so my muscles would fatigue. And I would get weaker over time from a bad story. Whereas when I changed the story, and it sounds like woo shit, but this was fucking as real as shit, when I changed the story, I started to get stronger. I started to cope with pain better. And that's just a very basic example, but this stuff maps to society level things. Like when you have a vision of Rome that you're fighting for in an army, you're going to, and connected to that vision is your family, is your wife, your beautiful wife that you're fighting for, and those beautiful kids that you had with her, and that home that you have. Like you see Gladiator, when throughout the movie he keeps having flashes of his wife and children, and that's what he's fighting for. He knows that, and it's that energy, that story that carries him through the intense hardship of being a warrior and whatnot. And so these ancients, like, they didn't have the luxury of all these chemicals that we had. So they would have to create a vast amount of stories that would help people, that would motivate people to overcome these situations. They would have to paint their reality with stories that make you strong. And so these stories that the ancients had, which turned into their mythologies, were under the pressure of evolutionary success. If their stories made them cucks or weak, they would die out. And therefore, the stories that survived were the ones that gave people the most meaning and allowed them to overcome the most hardship. And you even see this nowadays with modern Greek stories. People still love listening to Greek myths because they just hit something so fundamental about human psychology that they still work. That's what's so profound about them. And so this is where we start getting into an interesting idea of the free healthcare system. Because we have now the chemical healthcare system, if you will, healthcare system. But these ancients didn't have that luxury. So what they would do is they would collect all these stories and they would store them up in the sky, in the zodiac and whatnot. You'd have, Leo doing something with lynx and Cancer and all this stuff. This is all related to a mythological story. And so when someone was down and out, they were feeling pain and they were suffering and they had that broken leg and they were like, why don't I just keel over and die? Why don't I just give up? And they would be lying there and they'd be looking up at that empty, dead night of stars that we see, because we look up and we see an empty sky. They would look up and they would see all this and they would be like, wait a second, the gods are up there with their wars and their stories, and it would inspire them to keep going. And so this would act as a tool, as a public tool, because all you'd have to do is sit down with a kid for 5-10 years and give them these stories and teach them what is up there in the sky, and then they would have this for life. It's permanent mindset shift, a permanent healthcare solution, and it would be global, and it would be the entire society would have it. And so this is what they would, this is the tool that they used in order to keep their population healthy. And this shows us, like, there's obviously more to mythologies, but this shows us the most unbelievably basic and pragmatic sense of why you need a sky populated with gods and stories and a myth. And this is, as we said, the zodiac is their way of storing it. And all cultures around the world use the stars in the same way, because it is where you look when you're lost. And what do we do when we're lost? We look up at the stars and see empty, meaningless, burning balls of gas that will eventually die into nothing. Whereas instead, they saw the stories that brought them hope. And so what we call this is a symbolism. Now, I saw this in Aion, since we're in an Aion lecture. This is what Jung was talking about, is that you need this symbolism. You can think of that as like a collection of stories. And you need this in order to keep yourself sane, pretty much. This is what you require the most. And this is the collection of stories up there in the sky. And the way that this symbolism is established is through a dogma. So you would have, the Greeks would sit down and tell the canon of stories to their kids, and that would fill the sky, and the kid's mind would connect to the sky, and then they'd have that symbol in them, and then it's like this software program that suddenly they're all engaged in. They're all of these people are employed with, all of these people understand, and they're all unified together in the same set of software, and they're all spiritualized, they're all motivated in the same way. So you need that symbolism, you need that sky full of gods, and the way you do that is with a dogma. And so obviously I'm going to talk about a few of them. I'm talking about the Greeks a lot because I think they're uber cool. This is the Greek one. You know of the Greek pantheon. You see this boyo here giving you no look. He's looking at James being like, you're such a soy. I'm going to stop and being mean.
He is. He's staring directly at me. That's quite nice, actually. He should take that red cloak off, and we'll really get down to it. I've got to stop, man. I've got to stop.
Yes. This is the Greek pantheon, and this is a good example of their symbolism. The symbolism. This is a good example of what they saw as the figures, the powers, the most profound versions of themselves, the most profound versions of their emotions that lived in these stories in the sky and would guide them. This was their mythology, and this was their free healthcare system. And now, of course, when we moved on from Greek philosophy, and you could call that Greco-Roman philosophy, as they say, we moved into the Christian philosophy. Now, what I find interesting is that people want to say Christianity is like gay and empty and shit and all this. And, it's not as cool as the Greeks and all that. But the more you look into Christianity, and especially the Catholics, you see that they have, they have an unbelievably vitalized and rich symbolism as well. They have it too. And it's so potent and powerful. And it's even better in some senses because we were more modern when we were under this one. So we've done more beautiful art about it, so we can see it more. But the Christians had their symbolism. They had their myth of Adam and Eve, and they had their angels that represented similar places, the Greek gods and whatnot. And they had all their great historical events. And the dogma that enforced this was the Bible. The Bible was the tool that they would use to take a youth and fill their head full of these stories that would help them overcome their suffering in life. And people were like, oh, dogma, they were brainwashing them. And it's like, well, okay, cool. But they were doing them a favor as well. Christ suffering with his cross on his back is a perfect example of someone coping with pain properly. And so having that in your head and believing it is a fucking useful thing. And if you turn around to people and say, all right, that's all just brainwashing dogma, and you empty the sky out and then they have nothing else to replace it, you're doing them no favors. And this is exactly the situation we're in now, where all of that is gone, and we are now looking up at the sky, feeling empty and filling ourselves full of chemicals in order to cope. And this is another example. Like the Greeks had their gods, and then they had their variety of different gods. And of course, this is very interesting about the Catholic thing, even though it was a monotheist thing. Specifically, the Europeans turned it into something quite sort of, they took the pagan side of it and made it very very angely, shall we say. And this was them honoring the psychological needs of people. They were adding in the story of Michael to get that retribution side of people. This is Satan and Michael, so they got that energy of striking down an evil person and imposing law and imposing force, where Christ seems like someone who's not quite a ruthless warrior and all this. And so they filled out the symbolism with these extra stories, which is a good thing to do. And Jung begins to imply over the course of this chapter that we are reading, the chapter on Christian alchemical symbolism, is that Catholicism is by far the best choice for modern people, because it is what our tradition was, and it is also what it's also better than Protestantism, because Protestantism just sort of sucks the soul out of all this. Protestantism thinks, Our Lady, the Virgin Mary, is a bullshit idea, and it culls out a lot of this stuff, and it in essence empties the sky, and it's the first step towards something dangerous, which is the death of a symbolism. And so he is very adamant that we need to take Catholicism a lot more serious in that type of sense. I'm shilling here a little bit, but this is what the man says in the book. And when you read this chapter, this is what the man says. And so, yes, again, you have this idea, building something up in the sky that has healing power. And it is a beautiful, profound tool. And Jung starts to discuss, okay, how do we come to terms with the fact that this tool exists and we need to have it up in the sky? And what do we do about the one that we currently have? Because the one that we currently have is shit. We built this symbolism up there with the Greeks, and then it collapsed. The Norse, as you can see here, they built their symbolism, and then it collapsed. And you see people nowadays trying to revive this, specifically in the pagan movement. And it's beautiful to see them getting back in touch with it. But it is that problem of when it collapses, what do you do about it? Because it's not straightforward at all. When a symbolism collapses, that's the death of the spirit of a people. That's like the software program's over, and the people fall apart. They fall into abject nihilism. They lose the will to fight and live. It's over. And so the Christian one is either dying or is in a rough spot, to say the least. It's taking a fatal blow, and it's bleeding out right now, because we look it up at our sky and we don't even see God. And this is what Nietzsche meant when Nietzsche said God is dead, that it's empty. And what happens when a new symbolism takes over is that oftentimes they will destroy what was ancient and replace it with nothing, or the new symbolism. As you can see here, here's Buddha getting cleansed out over in the Far East. That's what goes on. This spiritual warfare is taken very seriously. And you see this going all around Europe, actually, in America as well, as they're knocking down statues and all that. And they're saying, these symbols are dead. We're going to establish new symbols. This is a very important thing to understand, is that people take this stuff extremely seriously. Because once you get a new software program in, you have to delete all the old software programs. And that this can be like criminal in the offense it does to the majesty of art. Like, look at this beautiful statue. Imagine how much labor it took to make that. And imagine how little effort it took to bomb that thing and then destroy it. Again, there's another example. Beheaded work of art. And it goes on all the time. And then we're on to Jimmy Boyo.
Yes, I want to, before we go into the next section, I want pain is a mental thing. It is. Pain's a really weird thing, because Jordan Peterson's version of Descartes, I think, therefore I am, is that suffering and pain is real, and it's the one thing that we can't deny. And that's a horrible idea, but I think that it's true. I had two aunties until fairly recently. She got cancer. Now, one of them was a Christian, far more than the other. She kept believing, and the other one didn't. So one of got cancer, I don't know, like 10 years ago, and she survived for an extremely long time. Putting on.
My man, you're breaking up a lot.
And she didn't really believe that she had cancer, and that was strange. Well, that's not good. See, sometimes when I break up, it's only you can hear me breaking up. Okay.
Okay. Hopefully, you'll be all right in the playback. Sorry for interrupting.
Okay,
keep going.
if you can monitor the chat to make sure it's okay, we can ask the people
Sweet,
if you can hear me. That'd be fantastic. But yeah, so one of the aunties, she's held on to her faith for a long time, and then she died after a very, very long time because she held on. And the other, as soon as she got that diagnosis, she thought to herself, "My life is over," and that spring just hit her so hard, and it was heartbreaking because she started going downhill immediately. She started going down here absolutely immediately, and she didn't last very long. In fact, she got a diagnosis which was, "You're going to live for another 3 months," which is horrible to hear. She died within a few days after that because it just hit her so hard. So when you're saying that stories can actually regulate the level of pain that you have, and that stories can actually stop you feeling that suffering and stop you dying, I've witnessed firsthand as being absolutely true. Is the chat saying?
Yeah, you're breaking up a bit, but it's all good, dude. Power through. I think it'll clear up in a bit. I think clear it up in a bit. So you can churn through your section there, my man, and I will banter with the boyos because I see a lot of them have written down. So tell me when you're ready.
Let's do it. Can you see that?
Let me see, my man.
Can you see that? Okay, people see this beautiful thing. I've not screen shared before. We're gonna have to give me a couple seconds.
Hello, Boyoler. How you all doing? Matchune, what's going on, man? Alex, Wojin Koyuk, Neil Dennison, Board Shots, Raphael, Fluchtfleisch. How you doing, Boyos? Svinge. Severinge, I can't pronounce his name. Flying Banana, that's a great name. And thank you for the lit stream. You're dead right. And the greeter. The Albinist, how you doing, bro? Are you gonna like this one? A lot of talk of magic and weed and mushrooms. How are you doing, James?
Yes. Are we ready to go? Can you see the picture on the screen?
Sweet. Yep. I got you, dude. I got you.
Beautiful. Okay, so this part 2, we can talk about the fall of Christianity, which in many ways is the story of Western civilization itself, which it's a beautiful story. It really, really is. So the Christian symbolism was quite different to the Greek one, but it shared a lot of the same themes and stories. And we can say that the main story of Christianity is that the nexus of consciousness, the highest or the correct resolution in which to view the world, is through the eyes of the individual that does the will of God and suffers for it, and therefore is able to transcend his suffering. So suffering is built into it. And so these stories, they kept us psychologically healthy because they gave us a way to deal with suffering. They also gave us a way to deal with many, many, many other things as well. So it regulated our good and evil. It regulated our virtue and vice. You may think that Christianity was the operating system which our psyche ran on. It regulated everything. So we didn't really have to think. If you think in Jungian terms, the self became activated and started acting in a particularly Christian way. And so we could go and live our wonderful Christian lives. But before we get into Christianity, of course, we had the Roman era. We could say that the Romans were the most dominant force for the Aeon before the Christian Aeon, which was Pisces. So we lived in the Pisces, in the Aeon of Aries beforehand. And the operating system was pagan one. You can see here, I believe this is Augustus, which I picked. He's pointing at planet Mars. So the particular zodiac signs and the things in the sky, which people used to revere, were quite different. And that regulated their psyches in a different way. So their particular philosophy was very much excellence rather than an equality. But then the stars decided to change. And you can think that the stars perhaps are a way in which God wants to regulate the operating system of humanity. He said, no more Romans, no more of that paganism. You know, you're good for some things, but maybe there are other things we need to change and update. So, of course, we moved into the Aeon of Pisces in 7 BC. And then in 4 BC, which was the year Christ was born, we had a conjunction in the sun in the sign of Gemini, which meant that 2 little twin fishes were born. So you can see the one I've highlighted there is one fish going up to heaven. That's Christ. But, of course, let's have a strange little thing coming out the bottom, which people didn't realize for a very, very long time. So we moved into this particular era around 2,000 years ago. And this was marked, of course, by Jesus Christ being the King of Kings. And this essentially built civilization. Now, what happened in the human psyche was we moved from paganism into Christianity. And if you look up how the pagans were converted to Christianity, it was a very strange phenomenon. You'd think that they'd put up a massive fight and go, no, we're not going to believe in your strange Jewish god from the Middle East. Odin is the way to go. Zeus is the way to go. It didn't quite work like that. I'm quite interested in English history, and there was a character called Rollo, I do wonder if Rollo Tomasi, the Manosphere bloke, if he got his name from this man. But Rollo was this Viking warlord, and a very, very, very powerful man. Loads of statues of him all over Europe. And he invaded France because that's what the Vikings used to do. The French, the Vikings, and the English, they didn't like each other very much. They kept fighting. Then he moved about 1,200 years ago into France, and he said to the King of France, he's like, this is my fucking country now, boys. And the King of France said, all right, okay, you can keep your land, but only if you convert to Christianity. Strange idea. And Rollo, the Viking warlord, you might think he'd go, fuck you, I'm going to continue worshipping my Norse gods. He said, no, all right, fine. And he like converted without any problem whatsoever. It's as if the Christ symbol naturally overcame the pagan symbols. Just a strange idea. Humans naturally accepted it. So over the course of 1,000 years, we reshaped Europe itself into the image of Christ. But people, there is a strange character called Satan who was lurking in the shadows around 1,000 years ago. As the sky keeps moving, the stars keep ticking by. We moved from that first fish and we moved into the second fish. And this fish, of course, was a nice young man called Satan. Now, the midpoint between these two fish, if you can see my mouth, if you can, it's that little conjunction point down in the bottom left. When the unification between those two fish was the character Saint Joachim, whatever the fuck his name is, which you've talked about in previous lectures. And that was a unification between Christ and Satan, which you might think is a good thing. But of course, we continued moving on into this Antichrist era. And so this Antichrist era, this strange phenomenon started coming around called alchemy. And alchemy is a very strange idea where they were basically looking for the spiritual in the material. We moved our eyes from heaven where God was up there and Jesus was up there, and we started onto the material world, and we're like, let's try and find God down here. It's a very, very weird idea. But alchemy itself, it was a useful phenomenon for regulating the human psyche. Okay, we were looking for the spiritual in the material, so it was like a cathartic exercise which we were doing. We were looking for God, and in many ways, that's what you're doing today. If you have any element whatsoever, any drive to go and improve yourself. So if you break down like self-improvement in a Jungian manner, what are you trying to do every time you set a goal for yourself? You're like, I want to become closer to my optimal self. And the way that the medieval people, the medieval brain would have conceptualized this was, we want to get closer to God. And this is what the alchemists were doing. But the alchemists, they realized after a little while that the alchemical stuff wasn't really giving them the results that they wanted. It was kind of fun, but they started to learn a lot more. And this, of course, led into modern science. So modern science is actually nested within the dream of Christianity, if you track its genealogy. Because, of course, the modern narrative is one day Rene Descartes woke up, discovered science, and was like, we're now out of the dark ages. We've lit the way. That wasn't true. It was within the dream of Christianity originally. But our brains, in a Jungian sense, became more conscious. So if our psyche is linked to the stars, as the Aeon continued to move into the Antichrist fish of Pisces, you could imagine that the ego nested within the self is being pulled further and further and further and further away from it. And this led to modern science. We've got a few things here, of course. On the right-hand side, of course, you'll see Charles Darwin with his nice Boyos sign over his face. Charles Darwin, he found the theory of evolution, and that was a huge nail in the coffin of the Lord, because he's like, the Bible's clearly bullshit. There was no Adam and Eve. We were all once apes, and then beyond that, we were whatever. Although Darwin now is being considered not politically correct. If you want to learn more about what Darwin believed, which isn't quite what Dawkins believed, go read The Descent of Man. In fact, go read the Amazon reviews for The Descent of Man, because that's extremely entertaining. You'll really, really enjoy that. So we have the theory of evolution, which taught us that we were looking for the spiritual in the material originally with alchemy, but there is no spiritual in the material. It's just material. And the fallen world is a horrific place. You know, when he was on his voyages on the Beagle, he saw so many horrific things which started to damage his faith in God. You know, how could God possibly create a world run by natural selection? Darwinism is horrific, absolutely horrible. All-loving God who loves you is going to create things where sometimes you're born with a chronic disease and then something else is going to come and eat you. Don't think so, man. We don't need God anymore. Of course, through the power of electricity, which was Nikola Tesla who brought that to us, not Thomas Edison, but of course he helped popularize this. We able to light up the world and basically take full control. And using that power of electricity, we are actually able to leave planet Earth and go into space. So God's kingdom, which he created for us to live in, the place where the of Eden was at, he created this at the beginning of time, this force void. We can now go, fuck you. We can leave and go explore other things. Let's go colonize the moon. Let's go colonize Mars. In fact, why don't we go dig up Stephen Hawking's corpse, revive him, ask him all of his last secrets, learn from that, and then jump dimensions, so that we can go and colonize other dimensions. The world is ours. We are the gods. We are not subservient to something above us. We are the gods.
Yeah.
And around this time, a nice man called Fred Nietzsche, he came along and he said, God is dead, boyos. And you can read that quote for yourself. And he noticed what was happening, and he saw exactly, Stefan, as you said, that we looked up at the sky and we saw that it was no longer occupied by God or the gods or anything metaphysical whatsoever. He noticed, if you read that quote, he wasn't particularly pleased with this, even though he was an atheist. Of course, he says, who will wipe this blood off? And then he went off, of course, went and said, we must replace him with a kangaroo, because that's better than nothing. Better than nothing, right? So that became a serious problem. So we have a character today. So we fast forward to today, of course. We've got a character called Richard Dawkins. This is him as a young man, a young-ish man, ever young. He's old forever. And his type of brain, I'd say, is part of the cultural zeitgeist. And what that means is the ideas which he has and he popularized are now commonplace among everybody. So, for example, his book, The Selfish Gene, popularized the idea of memes. And I want to get into this idea a little bit because it's really interesting. So we presume that when we look at a symbol, like the Christian cross, that it's just a picture. Because what the fuck is it? Exactly. He's looking at it right there. He's like, the fuck is this? It's literally just a cross. This doesn't mean anything. But what happened to the human psyche, you could say regulated by Satan, if you want to take it astrologically, is the human brain became too conscious for itself. The ego fell from the self, just like Satan fell from the sky with God. And so that stopped being able to witness the majesty of God, his secret knowledge. So the symbol for people back in the past would be very, very different to how we view it now. They would look at it and they would feel majestic energy radiating off of that symbol. They would see it as a healing power. Exactly what you were saying, Stefan, where the Greeks would look up at the sky, or any Jew would look up at the sky and they would have a free healthcare system. What we look at these things today is we can't see the healthcare system because we're too conscious. We are too locked into the fallen world. And that's a terrifying idea. So when you lose the symbol, when you lose the ability to see the symbol because we've become too arrogant, technically speaking, our ego has become too powerful for its own good. And this was a natural thing which took place. Because it's too powerful, we've lost the healing ability of the spiritual world. The psyche, of course, it's just an illusion. It's just a piece of biology rotting away in our brain. None of it means anything. And so that leads to some serious, some serious problems. I don't know how that got in here, Stefan. I think you might have, been fucking with my PowerPoint. But that leads to some serious problems, which we can see. Now, you had a nice young man called Carl Jung a while back. He was very, 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 very nice, and he was. He was very, and he was often asked, what are you most afraid of, Carl? Because that's a normal question you ask somebody at a party. What are you most afraid of, Carl? And he said, modern science. Now, Carl Jung was writing most of his stuff at the very, very beginning of the 1900s. So way before the horrors, we'll say, of the Second World War, in particular, the atomic bomb. He didn't know this stuff was coming, but he could feel it coming because Carl, like a few other characters, like Nietzsche, like Dostoevsky, he was like a prophet. Maybe a religious prophet in a sense. Maybe that's a way we need to reconsider the symbol of prophet, perhaps. And that's a foreshadowing to what's coming later. But modern science is a very liberal mindset. And we've already conceptualized that it can be represented as a fall from the grace of God. If Satan is our ego, which fell down from the self, or God, we're now in this fallen world by ourselves and we're very, very arrogant. But because we're arrogant, we can go and do whatever the fuck we want, right? Because nothing means anything. So you can actually apply this in the realm of science. So you have the atomic bomb, for example. We unlocked the power of something which was called indivisible. So an atom, for example, comes from the Greek atomos, which means indivisible. Okay. And what the atomic bomb was is they took the indivisible and they fucking split it in half by firing protons at it. They actually broke the definition of atom itself, split it apart, and now we can destroy the entire planet Earth because of science. But it's not science. It's not science that's the problem. It's science in isolation of the healing majesty of those symbols. We lack an operating system which is sustainable. It's as if we've been updated to Windows Vista, for example, which is wonderful. It's pretty. But then the second you try and download an app, for example, you get a blue screen. And the blue screen would be this fucking atomic bomb because it's like your operating system is unsustainable. And in a cultural way, we have this absolute liberal madness where you've got all these people for some reason trying to touch Miley Cyrus very inappropriately. And she's got her tongue hanging out, which is there's probably a conspiracy video online. If you look at her hair, for example, it looks like she's got 2 horns there. But I ain't no conspiracy theorist, people. Don't worry about that. But we lead to this type of stuff too. It's the same mindset where we're free. Of course we can do whatever we want. The idea what the hell caused all this? You know, and then we have this actual photo of when we realized what the hell was going on. This was actually Carl Jung's Boyowave office back in 1902, and people were asking, where the hell is Satan? Like, where is he? Because if you look at what happened over the course of Catholic history, we didn't recognize Satan as being a real thing. He was there up in the stars all along. You know, previous cultures would have recognized there's another fish and he's going to be ruling us astrologically, just like Jesus did. Where the fuck, like there he is. But the Christians didn't do that. They came up with the idea of the privato boni, which we've covered at length in previous lectures. And the privato boni means that good exists and evil is just an absence of good. All you have is Jesus. That's it. There is no Satan. But what these two people realized, they were like, wait a minute. Exist. Where is he? What is he doing? And it's in our failure to keep tabs on this naughty little deceiver boyo that led to serious problems. And so we're currently sitting in a time where religious symbols are dead. They've lived from the dawn of time until relatively recently. We don't have them anymore. All we have is just the empty, vacuous, fallen world. And we're now at the very synchronously at the tail end of the Aeon of Pisces, which is meant to be peak Antichrist energy where no one recognizes the symbols anymore. We're free to do whatever we want. There is no regulating force. Of course, on this obituary here, it says, we never really understood religious symbols because they contain information that's unknowable to our precious ego. Now, there are different components of your psyche, some of which are unconscious, and they understand what the symbols mean, and they're desperately trying to regulate you by giving you the symbol. But now we've lost the ability to resonate with them. But, you know, maybe we've come to realize, hopefully, that we desperately need them back again. Stefan, you got any thoughts?
Beautiful, James. Beautiful. You, I got to give it to you. Your ship posting quality is very, very high. It's great. You're so much more meme worthy. Many of those are gas. I didn't notice with the 2 people asking where is Satan that he was in fact behind them. I can't believe no one told them.
See, he's right there. Didn't even realize where Satan was.
I'm going to take what James is talking about there, and I'm going to just dive a little bit deeper into the psychological shadow of Christianity, and then the psychological shadow of its balancing force, science, to add a depth to what James is talking about there, because it'll help us see where our heads are at right now. Of course, when the Symbolism died with Rome, you saw the death of the old gods, the old statues, as we were saying, and the rising of a new god, of a new statue. And as James eerily pointed out with them stars, which like I actually had never even looked at them before, but it does literally look like one thing shooting up in the sky and another thing falling down. It's so crazy, isn't it? And this was this thing rising, and this thing was Christ on his cross becoming king of the world. Can you see these, James, by the way?
I can, and I'm really enjoying them.
Beautiful, beautiful. Is yes, so we have Constantine. This is Constantine when he looks up in the sky and he oh damn.
Oh no, Stefan, I don't want to see your face. I want to see Constantine.
Never mind, it's coming back. Jesus.
These technical difficulties, people, I'm so sorry. Please don't unsubscribe, please.
Yeah, I got this. I got this, people. So I was going to go back to Constantine, and Constantine being a serious boyo, which he is right here. And he, my man, looks up into the sky, finds a new symbolism. You can see the little Roman eagle here. This is going to get replaced by this bad boyo. And this symbolism was based on a very specific set of values. I am the Lord thy God, and thou shalt not have any other gods beside me. And so it is a symbolism that forces an absolute honoring of God, an absolute singular, single-minded focus on the big shining thing in the sky. And so when they accept this, they accepted something that was very, very emphasizing of the monotheism, very, very emphasizing of one particular way of looking at things. And of course, the human mind is more mythologically varied in some sense. It's got more perspectives it can have to it, and the problem with monotheism is that it has great value. Like, it's good to raise Zeus up as the most important perspective, but it can have a little bit of a problem where it starts to become sort of tyrannical in some sense. Like, as you can see with Islam, which is an extremely monotheistic religion, they don't even allow images at all. They kind of restrict art to a large extent. Not all the time, but it can happen quite a lot. And Christianity went through a crisis early on in the church where they were considering not allowing anybody to make art of Christ. And that would have been a disaster, because some of the most beautiful art in Christian history was, of course, Christ himself coming through. And so what that was essentially doing was emphasizing, shall we say, the divine masculine in all its profound power, and in some sense holding back this idea of nature and what we understand as nature. And this becomes Jung's main criticism of Christianity and his main fear about Christianity, and the reason why he thinks science came in, because Christianity and monotheism tends to emphasize this God, this absolutism of the God, and kill off this possibility of the goddess. In some sense, she becomes subservient to it. If you check out strict Christianity, you don't really see much of a place for the Virgin Mary. Often Protestant religions don't like that, and even in Islam, they don't really have a goddess that you can just bring up to, you can't really just say it off the tip of your tongue at all, because it does not exist for them to some extent. They're highly ordered, orientated creations, and these are very suitable for desert environments as well, because there isn't much of a fertile, abundant nature living out there. And God is also representative of that power of order and whatnot, and that power of creating a city, but it's not related to this strange power of nature to pour forth abundant, new, fertile creations all the time. The absolute amazing strength of nature, the amazing myriad of beautiful creations that she has, and the way they often fit her inside of monotheistic religions is saying that God made her in some sense, and the healthy way that they conceptualize it is that it is God's responsibility to cultivate her and shape her into, as we say, the garden, where nature is tamed but not murdered, which is what you can sometimes see in the tyrannical side of things, when, for example, they're like, all right, let's delete all art of our prophets, we shall never represent that, and everybody, all we'll ever do is write. It's all going to be writing in that sense. And so there's this very big problem where you've got this desire for nature, for the lack of order, the abundant fertility, and the to leap into the energy of natural selection, and just, create all the art you possibly can, and then the best stuff will win. And then the other side of it is this harsh, ordered thing where it's like no art gets made except for what we decide, and we decide that no art's going to be made of religious stuff. So it's just this total clamping of this, and you need to find this balancing point where you have this masculine force cultivating something into order, and this feminine source presenting something that is fertile and beautiful and powerful to be ordered. And so Christianity, being a monotheistic religion, lacked this balance to a huge extent. So James is talking about the unawareness of Satan. And what's really interesting psychologically about Christianity is that they conceptualized Satan as nature. They conceptualized. Now, there was another form of Satan. Satan grew over time, but for a large part of their existence. Satan was conceptualized as sort of this Luciferian blue unhappy angel. But then, as when they were confronting paganism, the god of the pagans was Pan. They would often conceptualize Satan as that horned beast that they would talk about. And all pagan religions were considered to be of Satan, and they were nature worshipping religions. And so Satan got mixed up quite a lot with the goddess, and it was almost as if him and her were consorts. They were together. They were mystical deceivers, and even if you can think of the root of the Christian religion, the Hebrew religion is Adam and Eve, and isn't it Eve who betrays all of humanity with her inability to say no to the snake, which is Satan, the naughty guy who is deceiving her in some sense. And so this created this massive push against paganism, push against nature, push against the woman to some extent. And this is the thing that people talk too much shit about, where they're being like, oh, they oppressed women and all this stuff. But like, to give credence to that argument, to steelman it, this is what they were talking about. It was this turning away from the divine feminine. And this is the result. You get someone like Isaac Newton, who turns around and says, okay, cool. Studying the Bible is cool and all that, but let's actually look at nature. Let's actually study nature. And this was originally called natural philosophy. This is where we get science from. So that energy started to boil up in conflict with this spiritual division. They were too heavy on the order. They were too obsessed about the biblical works, about the dogma, as we said before. You need that dogma. Like, I'm not saying it was wrong. I'm saying you need it. It's important. But there are problems to these things, is that, and it's complex and nuanced, is that even though it's needed and important, when you go too heavy into it, it creates this shadow. And this shadow was the need to go into the world, go into nature and study that stuff. And so Newton was the experience of going into natural philosophy. And this can be set up in this type of way. You can see our 4 quadrants here, where you have God on the right and the goddess on the left. And if you have a god who is in a good aspect, you have the darkness on the bottom and the brightness, the good on the top. So if you have God in the archetype of God in his good form, he's civilized, he's just, he's secured, he creates the kingdom, he stabilizes it, he adds a moral order, he makes all of that stuff work. He's a great dude for running a fucking city. But of course he has a dark side where he becomes corrupt, he becomes cruel, he becomes deceitful, he takes from the city, he becomes tyrannical, he crushes the art and all that. And so ideally what you want to have is this God who understands his shadow side. You want God to be, a completely individuated person. You want him to understand his shadow side. You want him to be able to punish criminals. You want him to be able to establish order with the ruthless, powerful, masculine energy. But you don't want him to fall for that. You don't want him to engage in usury, engage in silly laws and all that type of stuff. And then on the far side, of course, you want the same with nature. You want her to be fertile. You want her to be creative. You want her to have this power to heal you. But you don't want Mother Nature to be in her bad side, which is where she is ruthless, where she creates 1 million mosquitoes and then allows 900,999 of them to die in order to let them go through the next generation. She's uncaring. She's got this brutal side. Lilith is the picture here. It's this dark side of the feminine, and of course the poisonous side of it as well, where the man God is on his path, and she poisons him because of some type of resentment, some type of emotional problem she's got going on in herself. Whereas you've got the divine feminine, which is just constantly giving, ever powerful ability to just create and always caring, ever powerful, like always forgiving in that type of sense. And so ideally you want a balance between all these type of things. You want the feminine not to be like too caring, because then she softens up what she's caring for. She smothers it in some sense. But you also don't want her to be too cold, like Lilith. You don't want her to think that, all right, I'll just let everything die like it does in the jungle. And then obviously you want these married together as well. You want the good civilized God who can establish order, who's not a weak person, to also have the feminine in his as like a queen, as a wife, where he is leading her, he is cultivating a place for her, like the garden idea, and putting her in her place so that she can express herself properly. And he's also making sure that she doesn't fall into this. And of course, she's the same. She's also making sure that he's not deceiving himself and going into corruption and whatnot. And so you have this good balance. Like there's an ideal way that all these forces would be balanced, and how this would work out mythologically or psychologically is interesting, because what we had before, the implication is that what we had before was a highly, it's almost as if we saw the world as God was only good. And maybe this could be the bravado boni problem, is that we didn't see the possibility that there was a dark side to God, like in the Old Testament, where God had a very deceitful and, well, a very cruel side to him. Maybe this is what Jung is suggesting, is that we were too unbalanced on this, and therefore we sort of took this attitude that the feminine was only ruthless and uncaring. But I don't think that's really true. Like Catholicism had a very strong Virgin Mary thing, but that's the implication. I guess this is the myth that we're sold about the Christian religion. This is where people, this is how people discredit it. They say, oh, they believe that God was only good, and that everything, and that they're telling us that women are ruthless, and they stuck them in nunneries and then repressed them and all that stuff. And so what we flipped to in the modern world is a return to nature, as I said, through science. And so we got everybody going back to the mother nature as this glorious entity that we should all worship. And that eventually turned into its own version of an imbalance. What we would do then is we would say, okay, woman has no dark side, mother nature has no dark side, and the masculine has no bright side. The masculine is only bad. And this is sort of how we started to fix that imbalance between God and between what we imply was the problem with the Christian religion. This is how we fix it, by flipping and doing the exact opposite. So instead of flipping it rationally and finding this middle place where you understand exactly what's going on by balancing all the forces, instead you go to the shadow and you fall into it completely. And what's interesting about the shadow side is that when you don't understand, when you're not conscious of the shadow side, it rules you to a large extent. So it's very interesting nowadays that people are very much in a mother nature cult. Nature is the best thing ever. Nature is all good. There's no dark side of nature, without contemplating the ruthlessness that is inherent in what it means to be Mother Nature. Mother Nature is not nice. Mother Nature is not kind. Mother Nature is a monster when she wants to be. And it's the same with, you see this quite dominant in our current worldview, where we think, like, a very, very interesting thing was believe women during that Kavanaugh thing. And psychologically, that's fascinating, because it's not saying, like, go for, like, it's not saying obey order or believe in the justice of the law, which would be the idea that, all right, we've got a just law system and all that. It says believe women without any shadow side to that. And another thing is the fallback into paganism. It's like we don't, as I think Jimmy has a consistent criticism here. He says, we don't understand that paganism requires us to sacrifice children most of the time, or at least animals, and drink blood. So we like taking the glorious side of things without looking at the dark side of it. And so these are big questions, because we can see the psychological imbalance going on, but we can see that science is a religion of the goddess. That's fundamentally what it is. It's an anti-God religion. It believes that God has failed us. He is dead, as Jimmy said. And so we need to move past him and focus on the goddess. And so if you wanted to sort of describe the symbolism that we are living under, but we are unconscious of, it is this idea that we live with the goddess. Because another side of it, whoops, that was a scary girl there. Another side of it is that we cleared out the sky where the Greeks used to keep all the stories, which was God's realm. It was heaven. Nietzsche's assertion was that the problem with modern philosophy is that we believe in two worlds. We believe in this world, which is nature, and the other world, which is God, and the world of ideas and law and justice and all that. And he was suggesting we need to kill off he was suggesting that this died at the very least, and we need to create a cult of this world. Nothing that fucks off with metaphysics and talks about nonsense. And so science is a tool of the goddess world. It's a philosophy for the fallen world, as Jimmy was saying. Like, when we lost all those conceptions of another world, we looked down at this world and saw nature's monstrous side and said, fuck, well, we need just to deal with this. And as this has grown, we still live in the civilized world because there are people acting this way. God has not abandoned us, I guess, if you want to look at it that way, as a sort of pagan force, if you want. And so we do live in an ordered world. And so we're still protected from Mother Nature's harsh side to a large extent. And so we think that this is what she is. And this is setting us up to this weirdness where we have an imbalance now that's compensating for an imbalance we believed we had in the past. And we don't see the dark side of woman. We don't see the dark side of the feminine, of the fact that it is something that draws us to ignorance and to not look for higher order things like truth and profound order and justice. It is a very emotional and fertile, but very emotional thing. And it is essentially, as Jordan Peterson says, conceptualized as chaos often. And this is the fundamental symbolism running underneath science, and it's almost like a teenager's reaction to their parents and no nonsense. The parents is like, you got to be a strict Christian and all this. So the teenager is like, right, I'm going to be a strict, read a lot of Dawkins, read a lot of, and then like believe Charles Darwin and all this. So you see this reaction coming in mythologically where it's like, okay, our new theory that's going to build the entire worldview that we live under, which is Darwin, is going to be this idea that we came from the goddess. We came from the goddess. Now, the difference for us was that God, the masculine force, created us. So he swooped down, like, forget all this shit. He swooped down and he crafted us like this in his image. So he had a purpose and a place for us. That's bullshit now. That's completely off the table. There's no way in hell we were made. What happens is, and this is so interesting psychologically, is that nature and woman and the goddess is related to the idea of chaos and also the idea of systems, because nature is sort of a system in a weird way. And so deep in the very beginning of time, there was chaos. There was a woman. There was the goddess. And what happened is, out of nowhere, life just popped out of the chaos. And then, or the universe just popped out of the chaos. And then out of that, the over time, life just popped out of that next set of chaos. And so we came from nature, and then she crafted us. So you see down here, he says natural selection. Is that not nature selecting? Nature, the goddess chooses. The goddess crafted us. She didn't do it the way the masculine did it, which is very, okay, we're going to make a man and he does it in 7 days. Sort of like, get the job done, and it's like, oh, fucking fool. Like he's so unskilled. Look how imperfect we are. Instead, nature crafts us slowly over time and perfects us in this long, winding process. She crafted us. She created us. The goddess is our creator. And this is the psychology running underneath this. And this is nothing to say whether it's right or wrong, or whether the other side is right or wrong. It's more to do with how we psychologically see this stuff. And it's fascinating. Because when we take these ideas and we run them, they become very interesting. A macro level theory of human evolution was what communism was. It was the idea that, okay, we grew out of nature and then we started to form societies. And now societies are competing like ideas. And at some point, we're going to start forming the most healthy society, which would be a communist society. And of course, that led to some of the most horrific genocides that have ever happened. And so these guys are struggling with a problem that lots of people have struggled with before, in that, what do we do about the world we live in, the system we live in, where it's clearly got a dark side to it? You could say it is the dark side of nature, and even in some sense the dark side of God. What do we do about that? This world we live in is ruthless, as James said. Like, this little poor diseased animal is going to get eaten by the lion. That's horrible for the experience of the lion. It seems like, or the experience of the animal. It seems like no one cares about him. He's made almost like as a parody. The weak suffer what they must. The strong do as they will. I think Nietzsche might have said that as well. And so, how could a good God have created such an evil world? And this is the question that rattles our souls. How can God, the creator, be a good person if he allows this universe to be so harsh? He must have an evil side. He must have a dark side. And so we see this mythology in the Gnostics, where they're seeing this problem that I was describing a couple of slides back. You got the 4 people. They're seeing that these all need to be balanced somehow. And this is an incredibly complicated problem psychologically and mythologically. They see it needs to happen, but they don't know how to do it. And so they're theorizing this is their solution, that the demiurge is the one who created this world, and that there is actually another secret world that he's holding you back from. So this is the shadow form of God, and he owns the world. And so he's made this world of nature, which is the shadow form of the truth. And that's why we're in this predicament. And this is not to say that it's correct, but you can see the psychology of what they're doing. They're trying to solve a unbelievably complicated problem. And in order to steelman Christianity, you get a lot further, it seems, when you, in some sense, just go with the idea of God being good. It seems to just work because it helps you establish order, and order is powerful because there's a lot of chaos out in the world. But at the same time, it's not complete, and it does leave you vulnerable to those problems like science exploited. And so there's a suggestion by Jung that if we are to progress, if we are to solve the problem we are experiencing now, we will actually need to achieve a situation of spiritual unity. As John 12:31 says, feck, all that stuff comes up. The prince of this world will be cast out. Now judgment is upon this world. So there's this implication of the ruler of this world is not the good guy. And then we go back to James. Timothy.
Yes, I'm still here. Don't worry. That was very beautiful. I do love listening to your sexy voice. I've got to stop with these like subtle. That I'm actually a homosexual. I'm not a homosexual.
Soft porn, man.
Again, so I'm not one myself. Right. Let's get back into this absolute fecking nonsense. Okay. Time for us to be sharing. All right. Can you see that, Steph Boyo? I want to make sure this is all working because I appreciate the people and I respect them as if they were women.
I can see that. It looks good.
Sexy. Okay, so Jung is about to tear into basic bitches, basic white girls in this little section, because lots of people think that they have a solution to the death of God, and he's like, "You're a fucking idiot. No, you don't." But what we can talk about in this little section is mechanics of God's death. So we know God died. We've been talking about it for like the last 500,000 hours, and it's what Jordan Peterson's been talking about for a long time. But what actually and what are the consequences of this actually psychologically, and what might that look like in the future? And it's not very good. So the question I'm going to pose to you before going into this is, Jesus, if you believe the stories, of course, is he rose from the dead once, but can he do it again? When he came back the first time, people didn't recognize his face, and perhaps we won't recognize his face this time either. So about 2,000 years ago, we've covered this Pisces stuff a lot. The fish symbolism spontaneously started happening. So this is Jesus. He's just become Christ, and he's fucking swagging around the river Jordan. He comes up across these boyos. They're all incredibly handsome as well, like really, really good boyos. But and there's a quote here from the Book of Mark. Is technically Peter speaking, so Jesus is BFF. So it's actually this guy who's giving the quote. So that's a weird form of feedback loop. But so Jesus said unto them, "Come with me, and I will make you fishers of men." And that makes no fucking sense. Like it kind of makes sense. It doesn't. And that's just one example of the fish symbolism which spontaneously happened because we're ruled by the fish in the sky, because we're all clinically fucking insane at this point, and somehow that went down and influenced people. And we all started talking about fish and eating fish and wearing fish hats, if you remember, of the clergy. But a lot of this fish symbolism and what Jesus was saying, because it was so complicated, it was crystallized into something called dogma. So here's a nice Catholic boy mass. Now, mass is a very weird thing, if you think about it. This dude, he's at the front of an altar. He's wearing a little green cloak. He's got a Bible. He's got cups. And he's like, "Let's drink the blood of Christ." And we're all like, okay, that makes sense. No, it doesn't make any sense. No one knows what that means. Let's drink the blood. There was a thing when I was an atheist. There was like Richard Dawkins guy. There's a meme going around, which I thought was just brilliant. So brilliant. And it was, Christians, they every single week, they pray to and they drink the blood of the 2,000-year-old Jewish zombie because he rose from the dead. So technically, yeah, if you're looking at it from the materialistic worldview, you are spot on, buddy. But as we've established, there is more to the world than just the material. There's more to the psyche than just what we see with our eyes and our senses. So the most common symbol which religions used in order to regulate the psyche of their clergy was dogma. And people critique dogma these days, but dogma actually carried a deep psychological power within them that when you listen to them, it would make no sense from your ego perspective, but in terms of your whole psyche, it made sense. And with children, you don't necessarily go up to them and go, you're going to go to hell, which is a symbol. You would give them fairy tale stories like Hansel and Gretel, for example, or Little Red Riding Hood, and that would teach them the morals in a narrative form. So we need stories to keep us healthy, and this is because the knowledge of the soul or the psyche is unknowable. We cannot, as ego people, as having an ego, listening to this right now, you cannot know what that means. It's impossible, but you know it contains something because it carries out a purpose to keep people healthy. So what the dogmas were is they acted as bridges through which people would actually integrate the collective unconscious. So when people, we get asked all the time, actually, it's a really funny question. It's like, James, Stefan, how do I integrate my shadow? And it's like, that's the wrong question, dude. You can't just integrate your shadow, but I appreciate your eagerness. The way you would integrate the shadow in the past would be to go through stuff like Catholic Mass and to go through the Christian sacraments. That would help regulate your behavior. So what's interesting as well is that all myths are exactly the same thing at their core. So, and the idea is you need to become a god man. And I've hinted this is the same thing if you set a goal for yourself with self-improvement. You want to be the best man. It's the same thing in loads of different religions. So, for example, in that's not what I wanted to show. Fuck off. For example, in the Christian transformation, it's you need to become as little children in order to get into the kingdom of heaven. Humble yourself before God, become children, and then you can reach God. In alchemy, you needed to go and restore your original condition. There's a phrase thrown around a lot. It's exactly the same idea, return to God. In Zen, if you're having a nice Zen experience, it says, show me your original face, is a dictum thrown out by the Zen people. Again, show me who you really are, your God side. And in Jungian psychology, because we love a bit of the uncut Carl on these parts of the internet, the whole idea is individuation. Your ego is going on a journey to try and reach the self from whence it came, so that you can see the same story of human health, psychological health, appearing all over the place. And that was wonderful. We were happy. We were drinking the blood every week, and everyone was having a gay old time. Not a literal gay old time, but you know what I mean. Until this man came along, and this man is called Martin Luther. Not Martin Luther King. He was a different man. This is Martin Luther. He lived around the middle to the end of the 1400s, and he is responsible for Protestantism. Now, somebody like Nietzsche, he sort of him as like a Socrates type character. So he revered him and he hated him at the same time, which is a sign that he's if Nietzsche's going to critique you and love you, there's something powerful. There's an energy to you. Something happened, and Saint John back in the Bible, who was an absolute lad. I love John. He said that anything that fucked with the church or with Jesus, we can conceptualize as Antichrist. So in prophecies, that would take the form of a million different things. Like, oh, it's Napoleon. Oh, it's Hitler. Oh, it's this, it's that, it's that. So Luther, actually, he fucked with the church so much, you could consider him an Antichrist. And somebody like Nostradamus, we covered before, he considered him the Antichrist. So some of the ideas which Luther wanted to throw out there was, he looked at all the Catholic churches around him and he was like, you're not doing as the Bible says. Because he didn't appreciate symbols. He saw that what the Catholics were currently doing was different to what the words of Christ were saying. And he saw that difference and was like, that's evidence that what you're doing is wrong. But what Jung is suggesting is, no, there's more than just the Bible. Our human psyche's taken those stories and lived them out. And in fact, as you were saying, Stefan, combined them with pagan elements like the Virgin Mary, and it fleshed it out. It became its full mythology. But Luther was like, no, we need to go back to the Bible. So the hierarchy of the church was completely removed. We don't need the Virgin Mary anymore. There's no stability anymore. It's your interpretation. So what this did is it fragmented the Christian population way down. And this is actually an advantage. Like Jung thought Protestantism was actually a good thing, because if you fragment up the church, it allows it to survive in many different places. So like a natural selection idea, if you have a mutation in the genome, then or you have a mutation in a particular cell rather than another one, all those different mutations will be under selection pressure, and some will be able to survive, whereas others will die. So if you've got loads of different Christian churches, some will be able to go and survive. So the Protestant ideals might be okay, but not initially, because it's incredibly damaging. So where are we going? So we had Martin Luther coming along. He was the first Antichrist. But then we had more Antichrists. There are so many Antichrists. I can't cope with this. This is a very nice picture of Isaac Newton. I don't know what he's doing, but he's got his prism, and he basically took light and he split it into many different colors. He's like, I found the mind of God. And he did find the mind of God. As we've covered before, just touching this really briefly. Newton was an alchemist as well as a physicist, but his alchemy stuff stopped being useful. Like Neil deGrasse Tyson actually says that he owns all of Isaac Newton's works in like the original copies or whatever it is, because he's a rich man, even though he's not a real fucking scientist, but never mind. but he thinks that the alchemy stuff was a mistake, and that if Newton didn't focus on alchemy, then we could have had way more in the world. And it's like, yeah, but you're missing the fucking point as to what he was trying to do. He wasn't trying to conquer the fallen world. He was trying to find the mind of God. But because it wasn't useful, the human brain, the ego, picked up on the physical side of stuff and used it. So you can consider these different Antichrist characters like Newton, like Luther, as being little Komodo dragons. Now, if you know anything about Komodo dragons, they're fucking cool because they don't actually kill their prey by like biting them and killing them, ripping them to pieces. They'll sneak up on a deer, like Satan sneaking up on Christ, and they'll bite it once. All they need is one bite. And then the deer or whatever, it'll run around going, I've escaped from you. And then slowly it will start to get sick. It'll get sicker and sicker, and then it will collapse and it can't move anymore. And then the dragon goes, that was fucking easy. And he comes up, and then he can eat the deer. But this is because Komodo dragons, they have like toxins and pathogens in their saliva. So all it takes is one bite from a Komodo dragon, and then the clock is ticking. You better write your will quickly, nice little deer. Clock is fucking ticking. So, and that was the same thing with what Newton was doing without realizing it, what Luther was doing without realizing it. Everything collapsed. So, going back onto this Christian symbolism stuff, we need it to keep us healthy. So you can say that human beings need an operating system, right? And preferably a good one, like Linux, like the latest version of Ubuntu, far better than Windows, for example. So, and the current operating system which we run under is scientific materialism. And this happened. There was a huge rift in the 18th century where you had science and materialism really splitting. There's a problem here. So both are incomplete. Science cannot work on its own because materialism lacks an understanding of the soul. Okay, whatever this is, whatever Jesus is doing, he's got a wound in his side. That doesn't mean anything. He's got a cross. That doesn't mean anything. These angels, they don't mean anything. None of this means anything. It's a random beneficial mutation which appeared in the brains or the psyche, whatever the hell that happens to be. It's an illusion, and it just appeared. It happened to be useful for a period of time, but now we can get rid of it. But it lacks this, and we need this to keep us healthy. Science reduced the psyche down to its biological processes without understanding what in the flying fuck it actually is. Because science itself lacks a soul, it refuses to recognize one could ever possibly exist. So you can say, Stefan, you were hinting that this world might be run by the demiurge, which is a terrifying thing. But Satan, or this demiurge character who runs this world, he refuses to acknowledge that he is less powerful than God Almighty. Right? He refuses to do it. This all means nothing. Only what the ego knows matters. But science can learn what's outside of us, and it does a wonderful thing. I get paid to be a scientist every day, right? I like science, but faith knows what's inside. And so Jung thought that the Gnostics were the first psychologists, and they understood this. Saint Joachim, he understood this. We need to bring them together. So I suppose you've heard, if you've been paying attention to the Aeon lectures so far, you might have heard all that already. But now we're going to go into something, we're going to tear apart other races, because this is going to be good fun. So here's a picture. I have no idea who the fuck they are, by the way, and I don't care either. So this is
Shiva, and Shiva's there on the left anyway.
Yeah, so somebody who's doing a funny little dance, and we've got a green lady, and we've got this man looks cool, and there's a dude down here who's being stood on. So this, for example, is Indian symbolism. Now, what if you've known any white girls before? I know I have many white girls because I live in a predominantly white country. You'll realize that white girls have an affinity for going to Africa and going to India in order to find themselves. It's a meme. Every young person now, for some stupid reason, perhaps not a stupid reason, I'm jumping the gun here, I'm getting too excited. Because they lack a cultural narrative, what they do is they go look for it in other places. So, for example, lots of people go to India to try and find it because India is rich, living mythology. People believe these things. You know, these characters matter to them. And so they go there and they try and find these characters. And you got a character called Sheldrake. He's a prominent scientist at the moment. He's very interested in unifying science and religion. And his approach is basically to take all of the different religions and say that they all mean something individually beautiful. We don't need a single godhead. We can pick from any of them and synthesize them together, and it's beautiful. But here's a challenge for you, and anyone on the podcast, just you can visualize this with your mind, I guess, or look up any kind of Indian mythology, unless you are an Indian yourself, of course. But I'm presuming the majority of people are Westerners here. Does this picture resonate with any other compared to, say, that one? And I'm being dead serious about it. Maybe because I was brought up a Christian, this picture on the screen of Jesus Christ, that makes sense to me, whereas that, it does nothing to me whatsoever. And the reason for this is because stories are biological and cultural in origin. You don't resonate with Ganesh. Again, maybe you do if you're an Indian, if you're of Indian descent, but Westerners don't resonate with Ganesh as it's irrelevant to the ancestry of your psyche. The stories that are locked up in this character in his cheetah pants and this man down here cuddling a snake, that's not the story of you, your genes, your biology. We evolutionarily split with India long before Christianity came along, meaning that Christianity and paganism is the story of Europeans and Westerners, whereas this is the story of other people. This does nothing for us. It's irrelevant for us. You won't find it here. So that begs the question. We've gone through Christianity and that's disappearing. We've got the Indians and that doesn't work. What the hell's going to happen now? Well, of course, we
become Irish. Become Irish.
You become Irish. You become Irish, and there's the problem with being Irish because I am half Irish. We are only half Irish is acceptable. But lots of people are starting to turn to paganism, and in fact, Jung thought that this was a natural conclusion. So if you imagine that as we developed, paganism was our original operating system, and then the god in the sky decided to update it to Pisces. If this update is faulty in some way, or we can't cope with it, then we revert back to our previous firmware, which is paganism. And of course, paganism, it's represented really romantically, right? You've got the Disney movie Brave, for example, where it's this beautiful Scottish princess. So if you could change your fucking fate, would you, laddie? It's like, she's beautiful and she's running around with the bears and we're all happy. And you've got, of course, characters who are like bodybuilders and they're lifting the weights. Like, I'm a pagan boyo. Yes, let's become strong and take back Mother Europa. And we're looking back on paganism really, really romantically. But I'm going to shut that down immediately because there are also problems with paganism. There have to be. And here's just a few of the problems with paganism, which we've seen coming back into the Western world since the dawn of the Antichrist fish about 500 years ago. So in the top left, you will see, I'm about to say a nice young man. He's not an evil man or a pagan man. Anyway, no judgment here. Giving his baby boy to Baal. He's giving his child away to a god as a form of sacrifice. Now, we actually seen this come back in the form of abortion. Okay, now this is not, I'm not morally pontificating abortion is bad. What I am saying is, and I believe this to be correct, the current abortion meme is a degeneration, technically speaking, from our Christian firmware down to our pagan firmware, where we sacrifice our children at the altar of freedom, just as the pagans would sacrifice their children at the altar of Baal, and they thought they would get something in exchange. It's the exact same idea. And on the right-hand side, you've got, of course, a slave there. Now, what Jung believed was slavery, which was practiced in pagan societies, excellence over equality, right? We don't need to care about your feelings. Slavery coming into the Western world was a slow rise of that paganism coming up where that Christianity was starting to degenerate, especially in America, because America wasn't that Christian. They were more deist. The founding fathers were deist. So as that was weak, we started to see that, well, if God doesn't exist, why don't we enslave these people? And so that started to come back. And on the bottom left, you've got the Salem witch trials photo where, and this is a really scary idea. So we had the Virgin Mary in Christianity, when she was the beautiful divine feminine. But Stefan, you were talking beautifully there about the dark side of the feminine. And so we shifted our focus from the good feminine in Christianity and was like, there's an evil side to the feminine, which is trying to usurp the masculine order. You know what we should fucking do about that? Burn them all at the stake. So, and that was another pagan practice, burning people at the stake. You would take all of this stuff and you think to yourself, okay, this is all starting to come back because our Christian firmware is decaying. And that's absolutely terrifying. Again, no judgment on these. You may be pro-slavery. I don't care. It's irrelevant. You may be pro-burning witches. I don't care. You may be pro-abortion. I don't care. Completely irrelevant. But it's paganism once again. Just give me 1 second. In fact, I'm going to go even one step further than that. Jung even goes even further and says that Marxism itself was a return back to paganism again, because barbarism is unique to paganism again. You can think of all the Vikings when they would do their raids. What would they do? They would slaughter fucking everybody. The knights, before they were Christianized, would slaughter everybody and rip their spines out on the battlefield. Wherever materialism is the main philosophy, mass lunacy will ensue. And the mass lunacy from our current modern perspective is identical to the barbarism of paganism. So what can we do about this? It's like, well, we need to update our symbol of Christ, right? We really, really need to do that. And, well, we take, for example, the church today. It's not really doing anything to resist this change whatsoever. Okay, it's remaining the same as it was 2,000 years ago. Nothing changed. And Jung pointed out that St. Paul deliberately dressed up the message of Christianity for the Romans. So why the hell can't we do this for the modern day? Can't we change it in light of what we've learned in the fallen world and update it for today? And Jung thought the best way we could go about doing that was the Holy Ghost movement, which was to take the nexus of consciousness back to the individual again and encourage a unique journey, psychologized. I know you're going to talk about this a bit later, Stefan, but psychologized so that we can go on our own unique journey to go and find God. That would stop us resorting back into barbarism. So his, at very least, Jung's temporary solution to this was to examine mythology and consider it important. And I imagine all of you out there, good job, guys. We're doing that well. Jordan Peterson laid out that first thing. So psychologizing Christianity, it's super important, but psychologizing it like reduces the power of it, but it doesn't quite destroy it. So we still remain sane on the level of the individual. And wherever possible, if you want to take this to its full extent in your own life, you should accept Christian dogma as an unknowable truth. So don't just consider it stupid, just accept that it has something that I should believe in as hard as I possibly can. Now, I'm not asserting this. This is Jung's assertion here, in case someone's going to come up. You have to trust that it's true, as the collective unconscious has been providing a lot of strange things to you, and the dogma should be treated as these strange symbols now that we understand Carl Jung. Now, there was actually a really interesting quote by Jesus Christ, and he said, don't put new wine into old bottles. And people have been like, what the fuck does that mean? Why are you going around telling these weird parables? What St. Joachim believed, of course, was that during the Aeon of the Holy Ghost, which we're in right now, we would learn that what Jesus was saying was not meant to be taken literally. So if you were to talk with Joachim right now, he would say, Jesus wasn't talking about literal wine bottles, folks. He was giving a metaphor for you to keep shedding the skin of a myth so that it can be updated. So whatever Christianity was in the past, we keep the core, but we shed the skin, and it looks different. And that's what the alchemists were doing. They were looking for a magnet in the fallen world that would allow God to reach man and man to reach God. It would anchor us together, stick us together. And the Christ figure in the first 1,000 years after his death and supposed resurrection, he was that symbol. It connected the ego to the self, and we remained sane. We were in that new operating system. The magnet in that case was the archetype of this God-man character. It had its historical reality in Jesus Christ, and it was like eternally present within the self. It was very, very, very powerful. So the fish was like this old symbol of Christ. But now, because of Jung, we have the self. And this is much more in-depth and understood. And this gives us an increase in our conscious development. Jung himself is helping provide these new symbols to psychologize what's happening so that we don't fall back into barbarism again. But of course, there's a question, and Stefan's going to answer that for you. What will this new form of Christianity actually look like?
Yes,
Stefan.
it's time for me to bounce on. Yes, I'm gonna start actually, because it's a good setup, is to talk about the Shiva thing, because I actually got into Shiva seriously at one point, because I was very anti-Christian. I just didn't believe at all, and it took me a while to understand what Jung meant when he would talk about going off to India and find yourself as like just peak level wankery. Like it's just not happening that way at all. And I got into it. I didn't have any Christian faith at all, so I got into magic, and then I got into Hinduism as well. And one thing that got me into that is that it's an Indo-European religion. Like it is fundamentally part of Europe in some sense. It's a really old remnant of of a European culture, and Irish Gaelic has many, many words in common with Sanskrit, for example, which is the language of Hinduism. So there is something there that it is actually on the lowest, deepest, ancient level. There is actually something there that connects people to it. So I don't think it's possible to just write it off straight off either, because there's something you can vibe with it a lot. And I got into it. I got into the symbols, and they actually turned into something that I really helped me, or like not helped me. I just really found them vibrant. I really got into like Shiva. It's like the force of destruction or something like that. And it's strange because I was able to fill my head with those new symbols and make something out of them. And I was reading a lot about magic at the time, like chaos magic and all that. And they have this assertion within it that you can take all symbols from all around the world and churn them up and turn them into something that's useful for you. So you are able to fill your symbolism with whatever the fuck you want. You can take a little bit of Greek, you can take a little bit of Hinduism, you can take a little bit of Christianity, although they never really do Christian. You can take a little bit of Jewish Kabbalah, you can take whatever you want and put something together, make this sort of big map. And that sort of does work. It did work for me to a large extent, but there's something super interesting about why what you're doing there is that you are doing that because you want to keep your Christian European heritage unconscious. That's what I was doing, I noticed after a while. After a while, I noticed that I was going after all this exotic stuff because there was a hole in me where the Christian understanding, where the European story was supposed to sit, and I was trying to fill it with new stuff. So this stuff did in fact work, and this is why I think Jung was so, like, I don't think barbarism is even a good word. I'd even criticize Jung here. I think what he's suggesting is that when you lose that, when that sky gets empty, and when therefore your soul gets empty, you need to fill it somehow, and you will go and take other things. That leaves you incredibly vulnerable for someone who is smarter than you to be able to swoop in and brainwash you, as exactly what happened in communism, when all these Russians were perhaps going through this atheism, as you see Dostoevsky talk about, God is dead and all that. It wasn't very hard for Lenin to walk up and describe a new God, which is the God of, and a new Satan, the Satan being the bourgeoisie, and give them a new God, which is the God of equality, and give them these rational gods. It's like, you could paint Shiva over that as well. And because they were rootless, because they had no roots, they had no connection to that brought them all the way through their history. They were sort of reaching out for something to replace this void, that it was very easy for them to get swished up in this. And of course, these very smart people who did this, the Bolsheviks, they brainwashed that entire nation and used them as this tool to spread their ideology like a disease. They used Russia as a platform to take China, to take Pol Pot, got him into Cambodia. They did it all around the world. It was fucking frightening. They even attacked America, if you look at Yuri Bezmenov and all that. And that all came as a consequence of these people were lacking a stabilizing belief and system in the middle of them. And so that's something that I learned to analyze in myself, is that when you're reaching out for stuff like that, it's maybe there's something you could learn from it, but you're never going to actually be able to understand it and connect with it until you've based yourself on what you actually are first. Jung said famously that you will travel the world to find yourself and come back home and find yourself on your mantelpiece. And it's that idea of always looking outside, and you will never find what you need, which is inside. And I think there's a deep amount of wisdom there. And it also adds the balance and the nuance to the perspective where, yes, you can go for these Shiva things and be like, this is our unbelievably ancient Aryan past, but you can't just, pull the plug and say Christianity's all bullshit and leave that void and not deal with it properly, not actually go through it and deal with that tradition properly and escape it. And that's the problem that we're in now, is that has been sucked out. Like, this is sort of premise and everything I'm going to talk about now. That's been completely sucked out. We've completely lost the notion of what it meant to be Christian, and we all consider it stupid and ignorant. And the danger of that is that we're unbelievably vulnerable to get caught up in nonsense. And you see it all over the place. I talked in the last lecture, I'll do it really briefly again today, is that science, and specifically the transhuman philosophy that came out of science is just simply another religion. Like it's taking all of the Christian dynamics. You've got the redemption at the end of time, the rapture. That's when everybody climbs into the machine and uploads their consciousness into heaven, the sky, into the server, whatever the fuck you want to call it, the cloud. And transhumanism is the Messiah, the transhuman, the first transhuman is the Messiah, is Jesus, is the Savior. And the AI, the machine, is an all-seeing, all-knowing, omnipresent, omnipresent machine that watches us all and controls us and leads us. That is more smarter than us and more powerful than us. That's God. It's all falling in there as well. And we don't know if us engaging in that endeavor is us actually tackling the truth and actually understanding of like, all right, what's the potential of this AI and what's the point of doing it and how do we manage it? Or if it's us needing to do something to fill this void. And I'm pretty sure we're trying to fill a void thing. And the problem there is that it causes a bias. And the problem with that bias is, one, you can be vulnerable to getting taken over, or two, you can end up making stupid decisions and pushing through things not because you can morally judge them. Like for example, with AI, we might make AI a certain way without judging for example, we might, build the internet and fill it full of these laws about censorship, and it becomes the all-knowing, all-powerful consciousness of AI, packed full of these biases on censorship that ends up turning around and genociding like a large amount of certain types of people. And that could happen all because we have this bias where it's like, we need to build this before we go into ourselves and understand who we are and what we're worth and why and what we mean and all that stuff. And so I think that's a very important and very prescient and very profound point Jung makes, is that you cannot escape the Christian thing. And if you go looking for yourself somewhere else, you will not find it.
Yep. Can I just bolster really quickly what I was saying about the whole Hindu thing? So that was actually really interesting when you were like, you picked up on the symbol of Shiva and it resonated with you. But I would actually lay out that perhaps you're a special case, because it's clear that you're incredibly high in openness. And you were actively searching for something, and you had that resentment towards Christianity, and you were looking for something. But what actually makes you I guess I am challenging you a bit here. What makes you think that your belief in this Hindu god, this Shiva character, was actually what the symbol was meant to mean? Because, for example, I can go and worship Odin if I want to, and that's an emotional state that I can take up. I've tried it before, and it's like, I feel powerful. This is quite occultic in a way. I feel powerful. There's this energy surging through me. So what makes you think that's what the symbol actually means? Like Christ, for example, he was a vector for information and a state of consciousness, rather than I'm going to tap into the Christ energy and be really peaceful now. If you sort of see what I mean, it's almost as if you were looking for that in like a very, very pagan type way. And another thing is, like, if we're looking for a spiritual solution to Europe and what's happening right now, is the Shiva symbol the best way to go, or is Hinduism the best way to go? It's the same thing with Islam, I suppose. Is that the best way to go? Is everyone going to suddenly become Hindu? It's like, no. And we can't all believe in different things. We can't just all have our own personal operating system, which is very Nietzschean in a way. Pick and choose which symbols you want. I want a bit of Christ and a bit of Athena and a bit of Aphrodite. It's like, that's not going to create a nice coherent mess. That would eventually lead. In fact, that is innately the whole barbarism dynamic, where one person's philosophy and another person's, they're going to conflict and attack each other. So Jung's frame is, we all have to do this thing. As a collective of individuals, we will work together to go and save Europe and save this world by getting in touch with the previous symbols that were in our past that resonate with us deeply and update them for the future. So on to you, Stefan.
I will actually answer all that by going through this. So can you see the screen, my man?
I can. It's very ominous. Number 5.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I actually like just the black and then the 5. The 5 we talk about. The unified perspective. You can see that, my man? Is that all good?
Oh, I can. It's very beautiful.
Beautiful. This is the alchemical 5-pointed star, where they were trying to achieve this problem. So as I mentioned before, there was this problem in Christianity where they fell ignorant of nature in some extent. Now, this is also interesting because it's not necessarily a criticism of God, shall we say, but it's more of the religion that they built out of Christ's message. You could say the Catholicism of it. And it was vulnerable in the nature question. We can put it that way. And so, of course, we compensated by creating the nature cult that we live under nowadays. We live in a goddess cult now. if you look at like the best example of this is you look at the primary thing that's driving all those elections in Europe, the primary thing that's driving the news and all that, the one thing that people will never question is we must protect the environment and the we must protect Mother Nature. Some people might not even believe in climate change, for example, but you'll never get them to say we must not protect Mother Nature. Everybody wants to keep the earth in place. Everybody loves the earth. So we live in that place. And that's a good thing. That's like nothing bad about that at all. But that's just super interesting that that's the perspective we're in. We're in a very conscious of the earth place. And but we're in a very not conscious of the God place, as we said before. And as we were describing with James there, is that we lost the symbol for that, the symbolism for that. It got sucked out of our souls. And so now we're feeling around with our shitty little hands trying to take stuff and put it back into place. And one thing we've done is put the goddess there. So as much as people don't want to believe that they're whatever, we've put the goddess in there, and she's sitting on that soul. Or some people might put Shiva, some people might put Aleister Crowley, who knows. And so what we're looking for now is to find something, as we were talking about here, where we update the symbolism in a way that gathers everything and puts it in place. And that sounds like an astounding thing to say, but that's fundamentally what we need. We can't take compromises. Like it's not going to work unless everything falls together into place. We have to make something like that work. We have to anchor ourselves somehow, and we have to come up with a new way of presenting the software. Now, this doesn't suggest necessarily we delete all the old software. We're like, get rid of Christianity and become like, Aleister Crowleyites or some shit like that. It does actually suggest we, as Jordan Peterson says, we go into the belly of the whale and we like redeem the Father, that type of thing. We take what it was and pull it back to life in some sense, and add in and bring it up to date, and put everything together, unify it, and understand these problems and these biases that we were talking about with the goddess and shaming her. And then the other problem is obviously going too much in favor of her, and bringing a unified perspective towards all of this. And so this is what it is. It's about achieving a unity. It's about achieving a unity. And that is a huge question, because how do you do it? How do you get this world and the other world to make sense to us? How do you cross all these strange sets of opposites? Jung suggests throughout this story, this Aion, this book, this is his core suggestion, is that what we consider the self at the center of our souls is unbelievably important, but it's there's something strange about it, where the self evolves over time. It's unbelievably important. It stabilizes us, but it doesn't stay static. Over time, it morphs from being the fish into being the alchemical stone. And then the question is, where does it go next? So it's that type of idea. How do we move with it? And as I described in the last lecture, you start with like even the symbols of God and all that change. You start with God versus the Leviathan, then it becomes the behemoth versus the Leviathan, then it turns into Christ versus Satan. And this type of idea, all of this stuff, it is evolving. And the problem that we have reached is that the pair of opposites, so if you had God and the Leviathan as a set of opposites, being like, the stable society versus the chaos of the world, and then the behemoths like the state versus the chaos of corruption. Now we're at a position where our set of opposites are Christ and Satan, are like the good man versus the bad man. We've got one huge difficulty versus this world that we can feel and touch, the other world that's invisible, that dominates this world, but we cannot prove. And that is related to this inner world that we talk about. This is the world that connects us all, the higher dimensions in some sense. How do we cross that? It's so difficult. It's so strange. It's so eerie. But I guess becoming conscious of the problem is what I'm talking about. And Jung, as James was saying, suggests that it will take a rebirth of the Christ meme. Big J, we think once God died, this guy here, his son, this is like, it's so strange how we deal with him in the modern world. And this is something very important to understand, is that people won't be able to just simply ignore Christ. Like, you'll notice that in modern culture, people have to do this weird thing where they make fun of him. they can't there's something about him where like whatever he represents, whatever he means, they can't just forget about him and move on. And that's super interesting. Like the same way as you could probably live an entire life not knowing who Odin is, and you'd probably get on by and live a fine life and even be very productive and healthy. But we just can't escape the Christ question. Like if you moved on to a new, you started believing in Aleister Crowley or whatever, you wouldn't be able to escape whatever this man was, whatever his story meant. It would be with you forever, and you would always be fighting against it. Nietzsche is the best example of this. Nietzsche was trying to break free from Christ, from the Christ meme, to create the Ubermensch meme. But the end of his life, like, was him oscillating between writing "I am Dionysus" and "I am the crucified," and he was like in this cycle where he was bouncing from this extreme where he was like the Antichrist, Dionysian Ubermensch, breaking free from this, but then he was oscillating back and being like, I am a man who suffers just like Christ, and Christ suffered nobly, and I don't know what to do about it. And so this attempt to break away is defined by this relationship. It is these pair of opposites. And Jung says that like the ions, the ions of the self evolves when these pair of opposites polarize, as we're talking about now, Christ and Antichrist, polarize. And then the actual transition, the actual change point is when they polarize and then they unify into something new. And so we might be in a position where we need to see the rebirth of Jesus, or the big C, if you want, in a situation that has him unified with all this otherworldly and worldly perspective put together, and also his kind and benevolent and good God side mixed with the cruel, judgmental and bad God side. And that is actually something implied in Revelations. And so this is something that seems to be on the horizon, and Jung is suggesting this is something like this may need to happen. Now, what he noticed as well, and this is where it gets kind of creepy, is that the way we represented Christ, and so this is another very important distinction. He was a historical man, but the way we represent, the way we store him as an idea is different than who he was. We sort of store him in the heavens, and this isn't to say he doesn't live in heaven, but it's almost like the way our ideas, our psychology works, is that we stick him up into the stars. And when we stick him up into the stars, he becomes very much related to how the stars work. So he becomes a god of the zodiac in some sense. And so Jung noticed very interestingly that the way our ideas, the way we dealt with the Christ meme, was we considered him like this mute and unconscious fish. And that's representative of ourself. Like our self back then was very mute and unconscious. We were very easily able to accept all these sort of weird empty words that you feel nowadays, where it's like Jesus died for our sins. Like if you tell that to a modern person, it just they're dead words. They're like, what the fuck does that even mean, man? Like that's just ridiculous. Like what the fuck is died for our sins? I like, everybody still feels pain and all that shit, so I don't get it anymore. But back then, where our heads were at, where our self was at, we were able to just, like, that just made perfect sense. The savior has come. People would be like, yes. If you were like, the savior has come nowadays, they'd be like, oh, he's probably just some fucking weirdo with a piece of cardboard out in the street. And Jung noticed that it moved into the alchemical stone. That was the next thing. So it went from this mute and unconscious fish to started turning into this implication, as we talked in the last lecture, of this need for a new stone, as we talked about, and the beautiful mathematical alchemy, and these focusing on creating something new and a new perspective. And so the meme was trying to update itself, it seems. And of course, we mentioned that one shadow aspect is this meme is leaning towards, it's leaning our psychology towards desiring to create the God man ourselves. And we're in the process of achieving something like this. It's very strange what's going on. But another update to this, another perspective that Jung was taking, is that it won't manifest, like, this is it manifesting in the material world, when we refuse to see the other world, and we just keep on focusing on this world. And he's saying this is what will happen. Well, he's not saying that, but it's this implication of the way we will update this new stone is by turning it into, a machine that lives, a living stone. And that's interesting. Maybe that's what has to happen. Like, this is the other thing. Like, maybe we do actually need to just say, no, there is no other world, and we live in Satan's world, and we just need to build machines. Maybe that's the truth. Maybe that's just a hard thing that we can't digest. But if it's not, Jung is asking the question, like, what do we do? Where does the self go next? And he's suggesting that it'll be very difficult for us to accept the very old Christ meme. It's not impossible, but it's just, as you can see, moderns don't vibe with it that well anymore. And so he's seeing, or he's implying that it will probably take the next step, the next movement will probably be where we create something that is closer to a symbol, closer to a concept, closer to an idea, as opposed to a man in some sense. The next update of the Christ meme will be surrounding a notion, a concept. And we talk about this briefly in with the logos thing. I'll talk about it now in a second. But a good example of this would be the Tao over in the East. Like, that's not really a god. That's not really a person. That's just sort of this weird idea. But it packs inside of it this beautiful unification of the opposites, and it's an unbelievable symbol. And as you can see, it sits at the center of a mandala perfectly. And Jung was implying that, like, through his life, he studied human psychology and noticed that our mind tends to produce mandalas. And so this correct, maybe what we're looking for is to get a load of individuals to pull out their mandalas, and that will give us eventually the symbol that we need. And so this is the one that sits in the center of the psyche in the East. And perhaps this is the only type of thing that we could properly digest over here. As you noticed, the Nazis tapped onto this very successfully. They realized that the swastika was something that connected with people very profoundly. And so they ran with that because it was working. It was sitting at the center of their souls, and they married it to Christianity. Like, the swastika was often sat either with a cross on the flag or a flag within the cross, something like that. The swastika within the cross on the flag. And so it is that idea of updating the symbol. There's like a new symbol going to be born, and it'll be a symbol for, yes, it'll be a symbol for this age, and it will carry us through this age, and it will do something super interesting. It will, like the cross, like the symbols that we had in the past, and maybe it will be the cross again. We just don't know, but this is what Jung is saying we will be looking for. It will provide us with this sort of center point with which we can build a symbolum around again, or we can perhaps redeem the symbolum that we already had around it. We can re-articulate what we've lost. We can fill that hole. So at the very biggest problem is that there's this circle in the center of our souls that is like a plug that's been pulled, and all the life energies zooming out of it, and then we're running off to India and studying, like, Australian Aborigine religions in order to fill it. And then getting really into like rational scientific philosophies like communism or transhumanism and all this. But Jung's saying that if we can plug that with the correct symbol, that little circle where all the water is draining out of, if we can put the right symbol on top of that, that will plug that, then suddenly that will fill up our psyches again. And then, all the pagan gods will come back in their contextualized way, or like, as the Catholic angels or something like that. So that will happen then, if we can just get this one thing put into place. Everything else will come with it. And so he's saying this is sort of the project. This is his solution to this problem. So how does it happen? So as I was saying, it could be something like the logos. I thought Jung said it was logos, and I was like, damn, that's crazy, because logos is rising right now, as you might know. But he said more so that logos will be something that brings us to it, and we will talk about that more in the next chapter when he gets into Gnosticism. But nonetheless, it could be something like a concept around that idea, because Christ was the logos. And I wonder, would it be a conceptualization? It'll be a visual, though. It won't just be a word, but it'll be like a little symbol, a circle of some sort that will capture everything within it. And he's implying, I think, that that's what needs to happen. So how will it happen? Well, Jung says the way you do it is through individuation. I sketched every morning in a notebook a small circular drawing, a mandala, which seemed to correspond to my inner situation at the time. And so he did this, and over time he started to get really good at them. And they correspond to my inner situation. And over time they started to naturally produce higher and higher order forms. He often described, Jung was like he was so adamant about this that he would do this behavior of creating mandalas, and they would produce stuff that was far beyond the skill level of the person doing it. Like some woman would start painting mandalas and they would look like, a 2-year-old's drawings at the start. And about a month or 2 months in, suddenly they're starting to form into these like incredibly sophisticated circles and paintings because she was just following her gut with it. And so this for him is the sort of artistic side of individuation. And if we engage in a collective project, all as individuals, but knowing that we're all doing it as a unity and start producing these symbols, and going through the motions of, as he calls, individuation, eventually over time, the solution, the circle, the symbol that will plug that void in our hole will begin to appear, and someone will get it at some point. And then when they get it, it will come out into the collection. Someone will put it up on the internet, and then suddenly everybody will get behind it, and it will be the real deal. And he's suggesting that there is something creative to be achieved to this. If we can do individuation right, if we can check out our shadows correctly and all that, we will pull it off and it will happen. And I think that's his conclusion to this problem that he sees in Aion. He says it is essentially a creative project we need to engage in as a species, as a people. More specifically, he's very European focused here. And this is what we need to do if we want to achieve something. We need to get something that we can spiritually all organize around, and that would be this idea of a symbol that somehow captures the tragedy of the fallen world with the glory of the other world that we cannot see, and also crosses all these and redeems our tradition, but also leaves us open to the Holy Spirit and like the deeper tradition underneath our Christian tradition that brings the goddess, mixes her with the God, and blends both of them with their shadow sides, and of course redeems Christ and puts the sword in his hand and makes him as judgmental as he wishes to be. And if we can pull that off, Jung says, we shall be all right. We'll be able to bind together on the same software. And if that happens, we'll be invulnerable to barbarism like Marxism. And I think that is the conclusion. If you would like any questions, we're going to take them now. Drop down into the chat. And if we do not see them, if you want to bump to the top, hit up paypal.me, boyofuckingalert.com. Well, it's BoyoAlert. And if not, join the Discord. You can come in and chat with us. It's down there in the description. You can pop in with all that. And you will most certainly enjoy that, my friends. I wonder, is there anything else? No, I think that's everything. People, presentation is over. Jimmy Boyo, how are you feeling, sir?
I'm feeling very good. I'm feeling very well. I'm gonna lay out one final thing I was just thinking of there. The most profound thing I've ever said. No, it's not. It might be. I really don't know. But the solution which Jung is offering to the spiritual crisis of the modern world, of course, is why you clicked into this stream. So the way I see it, the way Jung sees it, is you have two choices. You watching this right now have two choices. You go down the Christian route, or you go down the Nietzschean paganism route. It really comes back to Jung versus Nietzsche. Which one do you want to go for? And the Nietzschean paganism one will be an inevitable consequence of modern science. So you've got these two. Now, if you choose the Christian route, Jung has this solution for you, and he lays it out beautifully. We have a nature, and we wish to know ourselves. That's part of what we want to do. We really want to know who we are. And we find ourselves as a soul locked in a material and in a spiritual world. And our psyche itself, as Jung taught us, is that unification between spiritual and material. So the Christian solution is to be as religious as we possibly can in a Christian sense, also acting it out. And this would be the only way for us to remain sane as we possibly can. So Jesus, of course, he said in the Sermon on the Mount, a strange phrase, which we still don't really know what it means. He said, knock and the door will be opened for you. And that gives people great hope. Maybe you fall into Dostoevsky's frame where you need to return back to Orthodox Christianity. And how do I do that? Well, Jesus himself, if you believe in Jesus, at least in a psychological entity, he says, knock and the door will be opened. You can get there just by asking. So to be religious in this new Aeon of Aquarius, we have to allow this spirit to act through us. And this means obeying the will of God, that morality in the back of your head, which tells you what's right and wrong, that conscience, you obey the will of God. It's Jordan Peterson's Pinocchio story. That's all it means. And he derived it all from this. You can tell he derived it all from this. You have a conscience and you obey the conscience. And it's a dialogue between you as Pinocchio and the conscience all the time. That's how you become a fully formed individual. You're meant to treat Christ as the highest possible virtue and go on your own bespoke journey to find God. Again, just like Jordan Peterson's ideas. This means reading the Western Canon yourself. Go to the bookstore, buy all these books, get Paradise Lost, get Faust, get the Bible, tear them to pieces and understand what they mean for you, because no one else is coming to save you. The institutions don't want you to go and turn back to Christ again. But if you've decided that's the path for you, you've got to do it yourself, which is such a burden. We need to psychologize religion as something which is unknowable, but it's necessary. And as you said, Stefan, this means we need to upgrade our symbols. And we don't know how that's going to form. It will be a spontaneous thing which will take place, maybe in the mind of an artist, maybe in the mind of Stefan. Maybe Stefan's music will be the new symbol that we gather around. That would be very nice. And we need to realize that we're not the ones in control. Okay, we need to slowly carry out our mission to know ourselves, but we are not the ones in control. We embrace the Christian dream in a psychological sense through logos as this magnet, which leads us closer and closer and closer towards this very real, ever-changing, yet eternal God. And that, my friends, is the story of Aion.
We people, you've just signed up for the cult of the kangaroo. So please, I was just thinking about, I'll try and make a song that will just be this utter kangaroo, deep kangaroo worship, pure kangaroo caliphate worship, and then we'll just get everybody on board with it.
Rolf Harris already did that. You know, don't tie me kangaroo down, sport, tie me kangaroo
but
down.
See,
classic tune.
He's an Australian dude. We have to sever off the Australian. I have my
He's
Australian.
Also a paedophile too, and we can't be having a paedophile as the kangaroo national anthem.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. And we take a few questions. It's been running for a while now, so we won't be going too long. How are things on PayPal? James, you've PayPal open there? Check it by any chance?
I can check it, yeah.
That's sweet. We might not have any though, but here we do. Piers Murray. Does an omnipotent God have or lack the power to create something which he is powerless to control? Jung talks about the paradoxical nature of God, a flaw in our conception of God or in human logic. We are going to talk about that in the next one, because Jung begins to talk about the God meme then at that point, and it becomes a very, very difficult set of questions. He implies that God is unconscious. It could be unconscious, and that's probably a freakish idea you could possibly take. So we're in some way we're alone. There is a benevolent God, but he's not really like woke. He's fell asleep or something like that. It's a very crazy thought. So maybe God ain't dead. He's just dreaming. Who knows? But I'm going to research that chapter properly before I comment on that, because that'll be just way too crazy, that shit. Could the symbol be a frog? I was thinking about that, because that's a great example of it happening naturally. Like, none of these dudes understand the theory of what we're talking about when they go Keck or Pepe and all that. And that's a really great example of how it happens. Like, that's just a frog going nuts, and then suddenly everybody's like, it is like an internet. It's a little internet god. It's a little trickster that's dancing around the internet. It's Pepe. And it's so brilliant watching that. I just love seeing those, because they're so funny. They're so funny. They're so and it's so authentic, and it's so innocent. Like, you see the new one, I think it's Apu now, and he's got this like really, really innocent face, and he looks really cute, and I don't know, I just love those ones the most out of it all.
It could be a frog. If you think of a fish as something which is in the sea, so unconsciousness, a frog is something which can move between the sea and the land, so unconsciousness and consciousness. So maybe that Jesus will become Frog Jesus, and maybe it will be Pepe, and for some people it is Pepe, our Lord and Savior. So maybe, man, maybe.
And that's something you can map onto Christ. Is like, if people were to start taking Christ and do this stuff with it, what they would do is they'd take Jesus, the center of the self of the West, as Jung says right now, and they would start flexing with him a bit and play with him a bit and create memes with him a bit and see how he'd update. Because all they do now is they just make fun of him, really, and they just say he was a hippie. But could people start taking Jesus and flexing him a bit and turning him into, like, as I was messing with one day, and I wasn't consciously doing this, but I was just making fun of the idea of that he was actually just juicy Chad who people don't honor enough. Like, you know, like they kind of make him look like he's just some blunt smoking fool that was like walking around Galilee being like, hey, what's up? But maybe we could add his savage side, because there's an energy in people right now where they're looking for a savage side. But the problem there is that it's heretical. So this is again one of those problems where how do you wrestle it away from the conservatism that's somewhat killing the religious movement? How do you create this situation where it's like, all right, let's try have a religious artistic revival where we try update these symbols. Not even try, like, let's just go with our instincts and see what happens. Like, you know, one example I was talking about is the war between Lucifer and Christ. Like, that's the war between the Ubermensch and big old J, the second coming of J. And I wonder, is it possible for those two things to unify together or something like that? Like, could they fight in this big epic novel, and at the end, would it just burst out the solution? They mate and have a baby, and it is the exactly what we need. Who knows? So what we're talking about here is crazy in its connotations. You can do whatever you want with it, but you just have to do it.
There are very strange updates to the Christ symbol. There is a church in America. They keep bothering me, by the way. If you're watching right now, these people who keep bothering me, because I know you are, you keep tapping on my stuff because you won't leave me alone. They're a weird cult. They're a doomsday cult. The Church of God, I think they're called. But they worship somebody called God the Mother. So that you could see that as a slight pagan revival within the Christian church, is taking the feminine and putting it in its rightful place.
Yeah,
you know,
yep.
Their basis for that in the Bible is astronomically weak as to be pathetic beyond belief. In the Book of Revelations, it calls Jerusalem God's wife, and so they therefore interpreted that you have to worship God the Mother as being a living South Korean woman, or else you're going to go to hell for all time, which is just weak. But you can see that desire wanting to burst forward again. So it could be something like that. Maybe the whole Da Vinci Code, Mary Magdalene thing could be a revival. Who knows?
Yeah. It's actually like it's very interesting, because that's exactly what we're saying, is that there is that imbalance in Christianity, especially the way it was conceptualized, where it was anti goddess and anti pagan. And so now people are trying to compensate with it, and it's interesting. It's infecting the church. Like, the church has lost its masculine balls now. It doesn't stand up for what it actually is anymore, because it's compensating so much. And that's a great example of Jung saying, if you do not make what is unconscious conscious, it will drive your life and you will cause it fate. The church was not conscious of, like, maybe the species was not conscious of the shadow of what their belief system was, and now the goddess rules over them. And what's interesting is that, yes, we have our good side, we have the abundance, the beauty, and the world is a great place to live right now, but she most certainly has her dark side out wielding as well, and it can only get worse. Mother Nature is a ruthless beast when she wants to be. A snake sliming up two sticks, one stick representing Christianity, the other is actual modern life as a scientist. The only way to achieve what you want to achieve is to pursue Christianity as a snake on a cross. Could be, man. Could be. Kangaroos, frogs. Discuss the idea of psychedelics bringing a spiritual perspective back to the West.
Yeah, I did have a psychedelic experience recently, completely accidentally. All I can say is yes, probably, most definitely. I was talking to one of the patrons, Laszlo, and he was saying that he really wanted to get somebody to go on a psychedelic trip and then didn't. Christ, if you've ever had a trip, that must be one of the most terrifying you could possibly do, because living in, yes, I think it would be a good tool not to become spiritual, but to get you to realize that the unconscious, to basically to say that Jung's ideas are real, and rather we shouldn't just read them as mental masturbation and go, I am a Jungian psychologist, I'm smart. Like, no. You've got to do them yourself, and they're fucking real. So quite possibly.
It's an interesting problem, because something about them works beyond belief, and they're real, but we don't use them well in the modern world. Like, the way people use them is that they just simply get indoctrinated into. I've never met anybody who takes a lot of psychedelics who actually gets anything, you know. Like, they use them a lot, and then they just sort of get indoctrinated by what's dominant in that culture, and that culture is actually quite it's a goddess cult, and it's as I said, it's the goddess cult in the sense of imbalanced. Like it's like anti-God in some sense, in a weird way. It sees, yeah, it personifies all of that stuff in a very strange way. It takes what is dominant in our age and just gets people absolutely sucked up into it. And so that's super interesting, because that means, and it does have a profound, I've done them before, it has a profound effect, and it can change your perspective, it can open your mind in ways that's not possible. But they, again, it's that problem of when you do stuff like this, when you go to India, when you do stuff like this without the hole in your soul properly filled, they have the potential to absolutely gut you and destroy you, and you won't even know it. You'll get possessed by a demon or something like that. So yes, so I think it would be interesting to see something like this be achieved, where the context for the West gets placed back, and then suddenly people are taking trips where they're not, they're not doing it from a context of hippie culture, because that's some of the worst stuff, because that is very Indian inspired as well, and it's not authentic to the West. It's more of a modern thing, and I wonder, could it be done deep in who we are, and maybe like ritualized somehow? Who knows? A lot of questions there, dude. That's some high level spiritual religious stuff, and maybe like you shouldn't rule it out. Like when you're talking about what we're talking about, you can't rule any of this stuff out. Memes are the new sigil magic, and at the moment, for whatever reason, the left cannot meme. Yes, that's super interesting, because like the what's going on with the left is so strange, because they represent traditionally the liberal, open-minded, creative aspect. Yet they fail on every account to update, be open-minded, and be creative. And so it's super strange what's going on with that. It's so hard to know. There's something very stale there. They're turning into like, and they're the ones who hate the Catholic Church so much. And they're the ones who hate the Catholic Church so much. They because it's so dogmatic, it's so strict and orderful, and they're turning into that. They're turning into their shadow, and just like the church in some sense was so against paganism and the nature, then it sort of has turned into its shadow. It's like the left is becoming that now as well.
Yeah, the left mindset. So classical liberalism, the dawn of the left, comes back to John Locke and all those original scientist characters. Their mindset is the archetypal Satan one. But we're not saying that's bad, because you need a unification of both Christ and Antichrist energies. So they're very arrogant in what they think is right, and everything which wants to impose some kind of order on them from an outside authority like God, or an unnecessary hierarchy like the Catholic Church, their ego is too arrogant to accept that, so they're not going to play that game. This is why you can never change anybody's mind either. It's like the arrogance becomes so strong, you can never accept something from the unconscious ever.
Yes. It's so funny. Like even something topical as that YouTube purge, and as James was saying, you're like trapped, and so they're sort of turning into the tyrants that they were so against. It's so funny. It's so strange. Piers Murray, I find Eros to be a superior force for the artistic process, Logos being the optimum force otherwise. Is this essentially worshipping Satan for the sake of art? I tried to do a video where I conceptualize my thoughts on this. So check out the Logos of Emotions, I think it is, where I think the great artist combines both. The sculptor doesn't just, ejaculate all over the stone and just be like, yeah, let's just do anything. The sculptor's taking Logos through his hand and allowing it to guide him. But there's also like a great amount of like almost irrational feels going into it as well. So it's like a unity between both. I would consider it a unity. And this is what I'm getting at. This is where I even think the Christ and Satan thing is a bit problematic, is because to a large extent, I'm not trying to say they're not real, but it's like it seems like we're all about balancing opposites. And so there is this need now to push these symbols to a unity somehow, and understand, maybe contextualize them properly. So that seems to be what's going on.
Well, the updated symbol for Christ and Satan might well be Logos and Eros. We don't know. That's what Jung would conceptualize it as, and that would maybe make a lot more sense, because Christ and Antichrist energies are quite confusing. They've got multiple definitions. But on the art thing, you can see that picture behind me. Let's do that. Wander Above a Sea of Fog, it's one of my favorite paintings of all time. It's got a huge amount of logos to it, and when you feel it and it inspires you, there's definitely an intermixing between logos and eros. So yeah, and then that does push to a question I've not been able to answer yet, because I think we've been asked it a few times, which is Satan eros? Because then you start being like, well, Satan's bad, Satan's bad. It's like, no, you need to bring both together. If Christ is logos and Satan is eros, we bring them together and we move forward properly. That would be the Aeon of Aquarius, which is all about the unification of opposites.
Yes. About trips, have you any heard of the? I'll take two more questions about mass hallucinations, common trips for the participants. Yes, I have. It's fucking crazy stuff. I don't know what to make it at. Like nowhere near my expertise. It's absolutely nuts. Does anybody know of the book called The Nature of Consciousness? Scott Hendrickson, how you doing, sir? Yes, I believe that's by Newman. Is that right, James?
No, that's you're thinking of The Origins and History of Consciousness. I haven't heard of that book that you mentioned.
I was possessed by the spirit of Christ during a heavy LSD trip. This is the experience that made me Christian. I've heard that others have had similar experiences. Yes, it's super interesting, my man. Super interesting.
That happened on my trip. I went down into hell, and then I had to accept death, which is horrible. And then Christ appeared to me in the form of a cross, and that lifted me up, and I woke up. So yeah, Christ saved me from hell. And there are other weird themes as well. Like bad things would have happened, I'll just say it like that, unless there was love in the room around me that would have stopped me doing something rash, we'll say. And so you could say that the redemptive power of love saved me. And then Christ's redemptive power of love saved me. It's so powerful that but then the thing is, of course, I was asked a while ago, it's like, well, surely you're just going to forget about this in time. And it's like, maybe that we get back into and trapped into the fallen world again, and we get caught up in the nonsense. But like, I haven't had since that happened about 2 weeks ago, I haven't smoked a cigarette at all. I haven't even thought about it. Whereas I used to be like an on and off smoker. And it's like, well, okay, that's something.
Yes. Last question here. If one of the problems is that the left often mistakes feeling for thinking, the left would be hugely leaning on that feelings over facts, but they're trying to balance, like, it's again this problem where there's all these nonsense false frames where it's like you have Ben Shapiro on the other side being like, it's all about facts, man. It's all about facts, and it's these things are so much more nuanced and complicated, and it's to psychoanalyze the West the left is, I think it's been done to death, and I think people get it that a lot of these people are just brainwashed kids who don't really know what they're talking about. And I don't really have any hot new takes on that. Like I would say it is the left is more feels orientated and the right is more thinking orientated, but everybody's got problems with that. Like there's plenty of people on the right who are all that, and even to some extent the left and the right are like false frames as well. So it's hard to know. I think we should bounce though, Jamie Boyo. I'm wrecked. So I will talk to you later, people. Jamie, any last words, my man?
Yes, I love you and I appreciate you all. If you want more podcasts, we have a backlog now of quite a few. Jump on the Patreon. If you want to talk to us every day, and I know you do because we're very handsome, beautiful people, join the Discord, please. And that's all I have to say after that quick little plug. Love you all. Appreciate you. Bye.
Hope you enjoyed it. Please drop us a comment. Tell us what you thought of the new style of lecture. We really enjoyed making it. So we will talk to you later. Bye-bye.